Welcome everyone to today's webinar on global turbulence, sources and solutions. I'm Grant Schreiber, the General Manager of the World Academy of Art and Science. This is the third event in an ongoing series of discussions that began with two webinars last summer and continued with a one-day meeting in Baku this past March. The concept paper you received as part of your invitation was shaped by a provisional insight gathered during these two early sessions. The topic of this webinar is not new to the World Academy. In 1999, we posed the question, what is the process of global human evolution? And for the past 25 years, we've been asking this profound question about the future of humanity. It's a question, obviously, that's too vast to answer in today's webinar, but essential to keep asking as we navigate our uncertain world. Our focus today is on how we can collectively reduce the rising levels of global turbulence affecting nearly every part of the world today. While past meetings have helped identify common symptoms and characteristics of this turbulence, today we'll delve deeper, beyond surface effects, to examine the root causes and explore what kinds of solutions might address them. Rather than analyzing issues country by country, our emphasis will be on the shared challenges confronting humanity as a whole. This webinar is a step in a broader journey of inquiry, which will continue at a 3-day online conference hosted by WAS in June and July. We expect today's conversation to raise more questions than answers, but that is by design. We invite you to engage, question, and consider joining this evolving network of thought and action, and thank you for being here. Before we get started, just some practical issues before we begin. All participants other than the panelists are invisible and muted, but we do welcome your questions throughout the next 2 hours. If you have a question, please raise your hand. The moderators will see you. Alternatively, please put your question in the chat bar, and we will do our best to get a response from our panelists. We also welcome you to stay on this call beyond the 2-hour session, where we hope to open up the discussion broadly to all participants who would like to engage more directly either with each other or with our panelists. Now it gives me great pleasure to hand over to the co-sponsors of today's event, Peter Schlosser, Director of the Global Futures Lab at Arizona State University, and Iveta Silova, Associate Dean and Professor of the Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation at Arizona State, for their opening remarks. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Grant. Indeed, we have reached, in my view, a decisive moment in the evolution of humanity, civilization, whichever you want to use. Some people say civilization has reached crossroads. And this is not coming out of nowhere. We actually have to say that, we had an unusual period since World War II with relatively little conflict and wars. That, not to say that there were none, there were significant issues, but compared to the period before, it was a relatively quiet period. At the same time, underlying processes played out, and in essence, we were moving into the Anthropocene, an era where we see human impact everywhere on the Earth system, from the outer atmosphere to the deep ocean, but also expressing themselves in societal systems. So since about the beginning of the 1880s, we went through a cascade of accelerations that pushed us more and more into a situation where humankind moved out of equilibrium with the rest of the Earth systems, where we forgot that we are part of nature, where we thought in an anthropocentric fashion, we actually control, quote unquote, control or steward nature, rather than trying to figure out how can we actually live in balance with what the life supporting systems can provide for us, not recognizing that we overexploited them. And that got us then into a situation where increasingly we felt the Earth systems, in essence, talking back to us, sending us signals, telling us that we are moving into a position that cannot be sustained. Now, you could say at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, where these accelerations began, people simply did not understand limits. everything seemed limitless, resources, space, everything. But we also have then to recognize that at least since the early 1970s, Earth Day, Club of Rome report, Silent Spring, and others, we cannot say we did not know. We did not have the warnings. So in essence, we slept through half a century and let the effects of our activities on our planet accumulate to the point where we now have severe pressure points. Typically, over the past few decades, most of that was studies from the perspective of the environmental systems. For example, planetary boundaries. If you go through the evolution of the hypothesis of planetary boundaries, a lot of them were created around limits on the natural systems. Only slowly did we recognize that we are hitting these limits because we made choices in our social systems that led to overexploitation of these environmental boundaries. So now we are actually in a situation where we have almost a feedback loop. We have overexploited the environmental systems. They set limits to what we can do, and that puts more pressure on them. So that's something that we have to figure out how to press, to move against. Here at the Global Futures Laboratory, from the beginning of its design, we actually put not the environmental systems at the core, which is often happening in our peer institutions, but what we shorthand societal will, recognizing that the way we move on this planet, the way we make decisions, which value systems underlie them, is the key to understand. And that is still way under-researched, much less understood than some of the environmental systems. So as an academic community, I think we have to change our approach. We have to put human behavior and the understanding thereof and the consequences of human actions that comes from that at the center of our efforts moving forward. And that, of course, includes not just understanding how humans behave, how value systems, belief systems are moving through generations, but naturally that gets into the domain of education. How are we actually making sure that we are educating the next generations and those yet to be born differently? How do we make sure that in their curricula, these items are actually embedded as a natural part of the education early on, actually pre-K? How can we make sure that this understanding of a holistic approach is the way to go forward rather than the more discipline-oriented approach that we have taken? And it was, just to be clear, it was very successful, but it took us from the original idea of the university and what a university should do and what academia should do into a mode of operation that lost sight of connectivities. And understanding connectivities is key. Getting that understanding into young minds, using the methods that are most easy for them to use, to learn. They are learning differently than we did. We have to understand that. We have to work with them to co-develop education. That, I think, is one of our biggest challenges. And what that means for us is listening more to these young voices because we are leaving them with quite a few challenges. We are still on a trajectory where we are narrowing their option space at a breathtaking rate. At the same time, we are saying, yeah, they are the ones who are our hope. They're the ones who will solve the problems. That's probably true, but not without us giving up some of the ways in which we are moving on this planet. Not without giving them not just a voice, but also agency, also giving them a space in which their decisions or where they are part of the decision making. And that is tricky for many people. They are We have an easy time to say we have to listen more to the youth. We actually do. But then to take the next step of saying, what does that mean for their agency moving forward? What does that mean for their ability to be part of the decision making of their future, not ours? And so we have to rethink in the overall context of how we move as human beings, as one species out of 10 million known species, with the ability to lead to a species-induced mass extinction. How can we, in this context, make sure that the next generations still have options to shape life according to their desires? How are we willing and able to put some of the decision making into their hands and do that jointly? So that's the way I see that. That's the way we are looking at it from the fundamental design and action space of the Global Futures Lab. I know that was all the units that are represented here and are listening to this conversation, to this event this morning, are signing on in principle to the same thing, but I think we are all still in the soul searching mode. We have not yet made it from that soul searching mode into a mode where action is accelerating. So I hope that the discussion today, the ones that followed, based on the ones that have happened, will actually build more momentum around that topic and will help us propel into a future where we are turning the corner and recognize that we have to be more humble, understanding that we are one part of the Earth system, that we have actually pushed out of our space, our domain, and that we actually have to do everything we can to move back into equilibrium with what Earth can support. We, at some point, decided that we want to live on a planet. It's about 10 times the one we have. Well, that won't work. And moving off that planet, as some people seem to dream of, will not work either. If we would be able to create living conditions on the moon, on Mars, wherever outside there, that would be the ultimate stratification of society. A few people could float out there and the rest would perish on our planet. So let's not go there. Let's make sure that we understand that our planet is our home, that there is still a chance, although the window is closing, to make that work without too many losses. And let's work together on that goal. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Great words. Iveta, you have extensive experience with international education. What are your observations right now?
Well, my observation too are that we are in turbulence, major turbulence, and it's not just in the air, it's in our systems, in our institutions, and in our everyday lives in education. And it's increasingly full, our lives increasingly full with uncertainty, instability, and a sense that the future is arriving much faster than our ability to respond. And education systems are known for responding too slowly, too late to what we are facing. And in fact, not doing a good job in anticipating what may come next. And but this turbulence isn't just a symptom. It's as Peter said, it's also a signal that something deeper is shifting, that the old structures are breaking down, but also new patterns are struggling to emerge, and not just in what we do, but also in how we think, how we relate, how we learn, and actually ultimately pushing us to rethink who we are as human beings on this planet. And this is why we created the G Forces, a global futures-oriented collective on education for sustainability, a National Science Foundation grant that just was terminated 3 weeks ago because it no longer meets government priorities. But with this network of networks that we were bringing together around education for global futures, more sustainable global futures. We were not trying to stabilize the old. We were trying to work with the turbulence, to recognize it as energy of a world in transition, and to ask what role education can play in shaping what comes next. And G forces is not just a clever acronym, but a very deliberate metaphor that we wanted to use, because real transformation comes with pressure, with acceleration, with resistance to inertia. That's G force. That's what it feels like when something begins to shift. So G-Forces was built to meet this momentum, a global interdisciplinary collaboration to reimagine education for planetary well-being, for ecological justice, for system level change, not just in theory, but in practice. So we were connecting research networks and designing new learning ecosystems, not just to improve education, but very fundamentally and radically transform it. And so even though the NSF terminated the grant because because of the current moment, we also believe that what we already put in motion is unstoppable anyways. So the ideas are already out there, the relationships are in motion, the need to fundamentally transform education only intensified. And therefore, we welcome a chance to reconnect and to explore new synergies across our networks and across our work. Not everything we planned has gone as planned, but maybe that's also the point, because turbulence doesn't follow a script. It's very unpredictable, so it kind of pushed us into this moment. So here we are now together, so let's see what we can do together. We really look forward to the opportunity to explore the synergies and perhaps intensify the synergies across our work. So thank
Great.
you.
Thank you so much, Iveta. To give us some global context to the issue and to explain the symptoms of the global turbulence, I'd like to introduce Gary Jacobs, the president of the World Academy of Art and Science. Gary?
Thank you, Grant, and thanks to all of our panelists and all those who are attending this conference, and especially our partners, ASU, Global Futures Lab, Bridges, UNESCO Bridges, and the World University Consortium as well. It really means a lot to us that we're able to come together from different perspectives and address these issues, which are so deeply concerned of all of us. I'm going to ask for your tolerance for me during this meeting, because we had our first meeting in Baku, it's more than a month ago, and I've still not recovered my voice since then. And I've been preoccupied the last 2 weeks of what I can do to be able to speak fully today. You'll see it fades out, and I have a little makeshift support to helping me on that, which I'll tell you. But I think we're all aware and feeling the turbulence in a very tangible way in different aspects of our life. And even if we aren't feeling it personally, we can't miss it, because it's reflected in the media and the events that are taking place all over the world on a day-to-day basis. And we already, in a sense, know or think we know what needs to be done. I mean, after all, in 2015, 193 countries, for the first time in history, got together and looked at the global challenges and came up with a comprehensive integrated plan, which we all are familiar with, whether we call it Agenda 2030 or the 17 SDGs, and in an unprecedented way the countries committed that this is what we're going to do. These are the goals, and these are 169 targets, and so many other things. And yet, as we're all aware, 10 years after that historic event, we're very far from where we should be at this stage, and a lot of people are disillusioned and giving up hope. We already had a very detailed set of solutions. We even knew what it was supposed to cost and who should do what was the role of government and education and research and science and civil society and so forth. But it's not happening the way we expected or hoped. And instead of happening, we seem to be meeting more and more obstacles which we didn't anticipate, or certainly hoped we wouldn't have to anticipate. And I think the question before us today is why, after this unprecedented meeting 10 years ago, consensus 10 years ago, when we have a wonderful plan, we seem to be in many respects going backwards, going back to failed strategies and faulty approaches that got us into trouble in the Cold War. And we thought after the end of the Cold War, we were moving forward. And why is that important? It's not enough, we feel, that we know what needs to be done, or what should be done, rather. It's important for us to understand why it's not getting done, and what are the obstacles to that, and what do we have to do differently, more or differently than before, if we're really going to get the kind of support we need. Because I think we all know this is an unprecedented point in human history. In many respects, in terms of human beings have not worked together at this close proximity before, have never worked together in a consensus as what needs to be done before, have not felt the urgency and commonality to the extent we have before, and yet we're encountering so much difficulty. So our approach to this discussion, and I think Grant mentioned it, but for us, this is only a starting point for a discussion. What we'd like to do is put out on the table the issues of which we're aware, the questions that need to be answered, the solutions, meaning not just the solutions for how do we address global warming, but how do we address the society that's not addressing global warming, and get the kind of level of support we need, commitment we need, urgency we need, not to be raising military spending at a time when we should be doing so many other things. So we're really trying to say, yes, we have a list, a number of lists, and ASU has been pioneering a list of high priority areas we should be working on, but all of this fits in a wider context. What do we need to do to mobilize global society and build the consensus we need in order to do what we've already agreed to do in the past? So we're going to look at this briefly in a very short overview, just to put the picture on the table. One, about what is really the context today, how we would describe the global evolutionary context today, and what makes it different and unique in history, at least in degree, if not in type. Secondly, what do we mean by turbulence? What do we mean? What are the symptoms or characteristics that we associate with this turbulence, which is not limited to a war somewhere, or a natural catastrophe somewhere, or economic difficulty somewhere, but kind of characterizes the whole situation of global society today. Then we want to look at the contours of how the world is changing today. Very briefly, we're going to share thoughts from earlier discussions, just to put it on the table. And we really want to open this for discussion. Once we get out a picture, kind of a sketch, we'd want to open it and welcome contributions from all of you, either orally or in chat, or at an extended session, or beyond this, because for the Academy and our partners, we want to take this. This is only the beginning of a much longer enterprise. And then we'd like to talk about the root causes of the turbulence. And we emphasize the root causes because as long as we're dealing with the symptoms, we know a lot of them, it's in the media every day, but as long as we're dealing just with the symptoms, it's not very likely that we're going to really be able to handle the situation we're in. unless we understand the situation itself, not just what we should do, but why we're not doing it there. And then, of course, the most important thing are solutions. And by solutions, we mean to the turbulence itself. We don't expect to give full consideration to any of these 5 areas in this discussion. We hope to raise a lot of questions and stimulate a lot of thoughts by our interaction and invite you and other organizations that and networks to join with us, because this is something that we need the collaboration from all over the world. It's not enough we have some understanding. We've got to get some partnerships and collaboration to make it happen. So with that, I'd now like to ask Vasuki, my assistant, to play a 6-minute video, which is excerpts of my opening talk at the first meeting we did in Baku last month. It was a 1-day program, which is what we were hoping to do at the ASU as well. But we're happy to be starting with this, just to give an overview and then open it up to some brief discussion on the first issue, which is our context, the global context we're in. Vasuki? And just excuse the audience, as a World Academy, as a transnational organization, is to think about this from the world's point of view. Our responsibility is to think on behalf of humanity and see what our choices are, what our options are, and what is the possible way we can convert this very turbulent transition into a transformation that leads to something better. But what is this period we're in, and what's going on, and why is it so disturbing? We're transitions of turbulence. The turbulence today is unprecedented because it's covering the whole world. And it's covering all dimensions of life. We need to understand the sources of that turbulence, because without understanding it, we won't understand how to deal with it. My premise in saying this is, without reducing the turbulence, we cannot effect a smooth, beneficial transition to the world. That's the context first. So turbulence is happening, and you won't see anybody blamed for this. This is a general phenomenon for humanity. So we're looking at it from the global point of view. The speed of social change is absolutely unprecedented in history. Doesn't compare with any other speed, and the scope of it and the impact it's having on society is unprecedented. The speed of technological innovation and dissemination, which is only a small part of this whole thing, though we rightly give it and recognize its great importance. We've got an acceleration of communications that suddenly brought the whole world together in an unprecedented way. We've never been like this. We've never been connected, communicating with each other, both positively to understand each other, but negatively to say, why are they disagreeing with me, and why are they so different than I am? The increasing intercultural contact, which potentially can be very beneficial, but we also know it can be very disturbing and very much generating of tensions. And we've never had a period in which social values are moving at such an accelerated rate. And then, of course, we have the environmental pressures which speak for themselves. It's also unprecedented. Humanity has never faced the challenge of challenging the planet and being challenged by all of the consequences of its actions at a global level. What are the symptoms or the outcomes of this turbulence? We see an increasing autonomy of the global financial markets. Money is getting divorced from economic development. It's getting divorced from human welfare. It's getting freed from the limitations of nation states. So we can't just point to one nation and say they're doing something. The money power and the corporate power is now, and the financial market power is liberated from even the nation state. It operates at the global level. We see the increasing pace of migration for all of the sources of insecurity. These are the outcomes of these turbulence. We see a shift to autocracy, plutocracy, and oligarchy. We see the retreat to competitive nationalism and competitive security paradigm going backwards 30 years, where we thought we knew which direction we're going in, because our current system and our multinational institutions is not able to handle the transition. We don't know how to handle it. We don't have the leadership. We really see we don't have leadership today. There's nobody standing up and talking for the world. It's every man for himself. We've lost the vision. We've lost the leadership. And of course, the fake news, where we're looking for answers and we're willing to believe any story that we hear, because people are desperate and don't find that all we have learned is giving us the answer. So there must be a conspiracy somewhere, or there's a conspiracy everywhere that we have to address. And then the result is the distrust in all our institutions. It's not the cause, it's a result of the rising insecurity. Declining authority of national governments, rising job insecurity, a very important issue if we're going to try to address the turbulence. How do we reverse this, where more and more insecurity, even those who have just emerged from top universities are going to wonder how relevant is their degree or their job 5 years from now. Nobody knows. Historically high levels of economic inequality, certainly aggravating a result of the turbulence. That the faster the change is, the more it will raise resistance. So the turbulence comes not only because we're trying to move fast, but because everybody in every area where we're not ready to move, it creates resistance. And it creates resistance in everything, and you'll see as we go through, that resistance meets us everywhere along. The turbulence is because we don't all move at the same speed or at the same extent or in the same direction, and we're not all happy to see this happening. Unless we can address the turbulence, we won't be able to steer the process. And that turbulence, it turns out, has everything to do with human security. Because what we're saying, what the UN has been saying on human security is, if we want to move forward progressively, we have to start by creating a sense of security for people all around the world, in all areas. When we come to talking about solutions, is essential if we hope to reduce the turbulence to the point where we can talk to each other calmly, think together collectively, and not be starting new wars with each other, which is happening now all the time.
Thank you. That was just brief excerpts from a very stimulating discussion we had in Baku about 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, just to highlight some of the area. Now, before we go on, what we want to go on in the next session is we want to talk about those root causes, sources, deep drivers of it, and then eventually, before the end of our meeting, talk about what can we do about it. But if there's any questions or comments on just what we've covered, as the sources are symptoms of the turbulence itself, Grant, you can moderate, and we can open it up for anyone who'd like to. We have panelists for this session.
Yes, we do. The root causes and deep drivers of the turbulence. Unfortunately, Ketan Patel could not join us in person today, but we're going to be playing a short video. And I see we have some questions coming through already. Eden Mahmoud would like to say something.
So once again, thank you for this very comprehensive and at the same time very deep, let's say, synthesis of the roots and causes. Um, I was wondering about an aspect, Gary. So you know that the society, the mankind society, evolved over thousands of years. And there were many moments of turbulences, and there were many moments of passing over these turbulences. So there is probably a cyclicity in all these aspects. Some parts of this cyclicity are from an objective point of view because there are factors that are beyond, and some of them are related, let's say, to the specific conditions of mankind evolution. So, from your point of view, how you would, how can I say, split these two types of factors? Which one of them you consider that are, let's say, aspects that are obviously and are part of this cyclicity that is coming over centuries, and which one of them you consider that are those kind of factors that are specifically due to us, to the generation today, and what we can interfere and what we can really fix?
I'll be very brief in my answer because I'd like to get more discussion than, but you've raised very good, very important questions, Eden. So I'll try to give you a very short answer here. I think you're absolutely right about the cycles, but it might be, I would prefer to look at and think of it as spirals, because though we come to periods that are up and down, we're never in the same place as we were before. And humanity is not in the same place that it ever was before. We've not just come around full circle, but we've come through periods before where we did make a breakthrough, where we did see extraordinary progress at different rates and degrees and extents, in different reaches and scope, but never at this intensity, never at this speed, never at this magnitude. And as I said, the defining thing for us, which is symbolized by the Agenda 2030, is we're all in this together now. We can't do it. We could have a revolution in Greece or Rome or Europe or ancient India or China and everything, and the whole world wouldn't even know about it. But today, it's not up to any one civilization or any one point for this, unless we are all in this together. And humanity has never acted in total concert together on the same wavelength, because unless we all do it, it can't be done. So I think it's unique in that sense, but the patterns are similar. And I just end by one further thing. I think the resistance is also similar. If you look at any of these periods of turbulence before, it not only came through great forward advances, may have been the Industrial Revolution, technology, or the discovery of the New World and travel and whatever it is, but at the same time, it always meets with resistance from the vested interests or entrenched forces or simply those who are not ready to go further. That pattern we can see, and how and that's often been overcome only by wars and revolutions. And sometimes taking a long time, sometimes taking centuries or decades to do. So I think we can learn something from your comment about the patterns. The difference today is, no, the world never gathered together and said, now we're trying to evolve consciously together and transform global society. And how do we do it? It's never been, there's never been an effort at this time. So we need to understand something that maybe we haven't understood up until now, and learn from it and apply it. And that's our goal. Thank you for a very good question.
Gary, we have a question from Jonathan Granoff, who's raised his hand. He's made a comment in the chat bar. There is no cycle after the use of nuclear weapons. Jonathan, would you like to ask a question?
Pretty straightforward. If you talk about historical cycles, in this age, we're the first generation that could actually become the last generation. So it's a unique, the decisions that are made now are unique in that regard. And that humanity, all the civilizations we have has had ethics as part of the guiding principles, the most universal norm of ethics being found in an iteration of the Golden Rule, whether it's in the traditional American Indians or the Central American Indian and Native peoples, or whether it's Seneca or Confucius or Buddha or Muhammad or Jesus or Hillel, you find the Golden Rule. But the Golden Rule is always only contemporary people you lived with. But today we have a ethical responsibility to future generations, treat the lives and well-being of future generations as we want to be treated. That, to me, Gary, might be a principle that could be useful in creating the kind of global coordination to address the turbulence of today. And that, of course, is very much in line with the WAS agenda of addressing existential threats, threats that would stop the cyclical or spiraling evolution of humanity. So I think it's important to highlight the uniqueness of what 21st century science, technology, and social organization have created, the risk of ending the human endeavor.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jonathan. Gary, Mila has one very quick question. We do need to move on, but Mila has one quick question.
Thank you so much. I'm really impressed with the way we have framed this, not only diagnosing what's going on in the world, inside out, as Iveta pointed out, that all of our systems, inner and outer, are in disturbance, as well as the way Peter was talking about understanding connectivities as central to everything. I just wanted to give a comment and also ask how you understand and if you see these two particular trends that I see in anticipation and future making as the very trends that are actually causing this turbulence, as if between two waves that are clashing. And very briefly, there seems to be two different modalities to future generating, to socio-cultural, econo-political emergence and the waves that they create. And the first, what I would call strong futuring, more immediate, more observable, predictable, depends on technological means of accessibility, accumulation, analysis of data that then allow for projection, forecasting, and trend setting. And then next to it is slow futuring, which tends to be less immediate and immediately observable, but nonetheless undergoing and with long-term effect. It's almost like an underground current that is shaping the relief from underneath. It is apparent that there is no direct dichotomy. It's strong and slow, not strong and weak, and so on. So a little paradox there, but the point is that you would notice that one and the former might be associated with the established power structures and more formal, the other less formal and more grassrooted. You could also identify them as difference between two generations. This is the elderly or the middle class or the establishment, and the other one might be the youth and the might from the margins. What I call the might from the margins is the wisdom from the margins. So we might have two long waves of different nature that are clashing and causing this turbulence. For the big questions that we need to ask for our own future making, for both diagnosing and solution proposal, I would like to ask Peter and Iveta if she can also participate in this. How do you see, if you see this somewhat academic distinction useful for understanding how to deal with these waves and what it would take to balance them. And I think the key just might be trust frequency, but it would be nice if I could hear from you.
Peter Roivetta, would you like to answer that? Mila, you have a session coming up a little bit later where you're the moderator. Maybe you can reframe that question and build it into the answers and discussion at that point as well. We are running a little bit behind. Gary, unless you would like to give a brief.
1 minute reply, just so that we don't leave it there, because a very important insight that Mila has. Only thing is, I would think that it's not really two. It could be 10 or 20 or 100, because society is at so many different levels of evolution, in different segments, in different groups, in different and all. I think there's a value in recognizing these two polarities, but I think it's much more complex than that. Society is very heterogeneous and multi-layered in all over, in all societies, and it doesn't normally move at a single pace in a single direction. And so I think you focused on one way of describing the sources of the tension, but I think it's more complex than that. That's all.
Peter has his hand up to give a response as well.
Very quickly, I mean, Gary already captured some of my thoughts. I hope we can get back to that when we have more time. I think it would take us even further behind schedule to answer that right now, Mila, in detail, but we will follow up on that.
We're moving on now to the root causes and deep drivers of the turbulence. We have a video message from Ketan Patel, who's a trustee of the World Academy and also the CEO of Greater Pacific Capital and the founder of Force for Good, after which we will go into a discussion with a moderator and two panelists who I will introduce straight after the video. The video, I think, is around 8 minutes long, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Hello, I'm pleased to be with you. I'm Ketan Patel. I'm a member of the leadership team of the World Academy of Art and Science. Apologies, I cannot be there in person. I also chair something called Force for Good, which works on the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals from the perspective of finance and technology and solutions that might be rolled out across the world. It's of vital interest to us to look at what are the sources of these solutions and what would it actually take to roll them out across the world. I'm also an investor and the founder CEO of Greater Pacific Capital. Today, I'm going to look at global turbulence and the root causes and drivers in a very short presentation, and I know that you will be having a discussion on this shortly afterwards. The first part of my presentation really focuses on what are the contours of today's rapidly changing world. And I think we all know as we look at the news, listen to any form of media or watch it, that there is an accelerated disintegration of the current world order. The world issues require urgent attention and leadership and resources, and this is missing. That the world is split into nations with might and those without might, those without the power really to exert their influence. America's leaders see the need to extract value from the world at this stage. They feel as if this has been an unequal, unfair relationship. They see allies now as counterparties, and there's extreme rivalry with competitors. American might vulnerabilities will be tested in the process of testing others, of course. The world is tending towards spheres of influence and new alliances. Alliances to see if they can somehow rebalance this might that has been used in such a forceful manner. Wars remain unsolved, with solutions that might actually result in wars again in the not too distant future. Economic inequality, a key driver of the populism and extreme forms of government that we're seeing all over the world today, is probably set to continue unless these issues are addressed. And technology supremacy, which has become central to military and economic power, is of course part of the solution too. Now, what are the root causes and drivers that lead us to a place like this? At a point in time when we are probably at the peak of our scientific achievement, of our reach across the planet, of our ability to even escape the boundaries of this planet and go elsewhere. Our chance to actually solve every problem that we've ever faced is probably somewhere within our grasp. But it seems as if we are in a form of disintegration, fragmentation, and conflict, instead of seeking to reach the next platform. Maybe that this is just a transition phase. And a lot of our work at Force for Good looks at the transition itself between an industrial era, our past, and an information-based era, our future. And this transition is a natural transition that happens in such a big changing of really a civilizational nature. I'm going to look at the root causes in 4 broad categories: socioeconomic, governance, and technological. These are intermingled in what I'm about to tell you, though. The first I'm going to focus on is the failure of socioeconomic policies to deliver prosperity and meaningful inclusion to the working classes. This is probably one of the foundational failures of our times. Second is the failure to identify and protect the public or arm them for self-protection against misinformation. This, coupled with the former, means that society itself is much weakened. That, combined with another root cause, another driver, is fragile governance structures that are unable to withstand the geopolitical, social, and technological changes that they find an assault on the system in some ways. And this leads to the inability of democratic systems to evolve. And this is a core driver or root cause of our times, that the democracies that have given so much advantage and spread so much good across the world find it very difficult to respond in the face of this level of change. There's, of course, also a weakening of national sovereignty and a shifting of power from nations to corporates and financial markets, weakening state control and the ability of the state to actually govern well. Another driver is weak governance and the oversight of money and markets and market economies, leading to extreme inequalities and systemic imbalances. This, coupled with an inadequate strength of global governance to ensure that the benefits of advancements are shared equitably across society and between countries, leads, of course, to many of the problems that we highlighted earlier. And then there is a neglect in addressing disruptive social and economic impacts of technologies such as automation, AI, robotics. And that is a fundamental disruption of all times. But as our advancement increases, it becomes even more important as a root cause that explains some of the inequities we might see within countries and across boundaries. And then if I draw a few more together, that form the basis of what I think are the most important root causes. Inadequate regulation to prevent weaponization of media and technology, leading to disruption of societal norms, espionage, of course, election manipulation, but all manners of disruption across society and between societies. A weakening of the global social values due to rising uncertainty, insecurity, intercultural tensions, such that we are fragmented. And this is an important root cause that explains some of the dissatisfaction, the uncertainty, the seeking of more radical solutions. And then a lack of integration of environmental sustainability into economic and political decision making, making in some cases environmental sustainability part of the problem as far as the public are concerned, propelled by some of the other root causes that I highlighted earlier. And then finally, a failure to maintain global institutions' legitimacy, the trust and authority, leading to resistance to modernization, to change, to sharing in solving world issues. These are 12 of the root causes and drivers that we found were perhaps fundamental reasons for the disruptions that we see today. All of these, I would say on a positive front, are addressable, but they require an extraordinary amount of effort given it's taken decades to build up to today's situation. It would take enormous shared responsibility, a new framework for making decisions to determine how we might move forward from these very fundamental changes that are being wrought on society. Thank you very much, and I wish I could be with you to continue this discussion. Thank you.
Grant, you're muted.
But we'd like to now turn over to the panel moderator for our next session, Isabella Bunn, who's an international lawyer and a policy advisor based at Oxford University. She'll be joined by panelists Francis O'Donnell, a former international diplomat and president of the Genealogy Society of Ireland, and Lawrence Ford, founder and CEO of the Conscious Capital Foundation. Isabella?
Thank you very much. And speaking of commotion and disruption and turbulence, I'm joining you from a hotel on the edge of Grand Central Station in the middle of Manhattan. So you can hardly pick a more turbulent place than this. Adding to the turbulence, I'm here for meetings both with the global legal profession as well as with United Nations officials. So believe me, they are too dealing with the very questions we're discussing today. And I know that through the good offices of the World Academy, those insights will also be shared with that community, both the lawyers and the diplomats. And in terms of what Ketan said, absolutely, the governance questions at every level, whether it's global governance, multilateral questions, whether it's economic governance, whether it's also the implications of the overlay of AI governance and how it's transforming all the other ways we think about governance and integrity and accountability. And also, you'll be very glad to know a deep concern for the next generation of professionals, whether that's in public service, in the diplomatic corps, in legal services, corporate counsel, the list goes on and on. So I think there's a real alignment across the professions here. So it is a voice of assurance, I would have to say, in the middle of all this turbulence. And I'm really grateful for the way that Ketan framed it, because we could sort of join on to that. Now, I know we're talking about root causes and global turbulence and those related challenges, but I have to share with you something that Gary mentioned yesterday as we were having a preparatory call, because I found it so inspirational. And that is the core purpose of this gathering of the World Academy, of seeking trusted collaborations across the academic community and the policy communities. The vision for a transformative global social movement to create solutions for the benefit of all humanity. Now, that is inspirational, and that is a remarkable ambition. And it's humbling that we are having this conversation to try to contribute to that vision. But it is certainly something that personally motivates me, and I'm delighted that there is this shared endeavor among the people on this call, the people listening on this call, their deep intellects, their deep commitments. And also, it has to be said, the way they are rethinking many of their own activities in light of not just historic turbulence, but literally the headlines in today's papers and on the news. So I admire all of you, and I'm so glad that we can unite in this way and make those kinds of conversations. But there are two people I would love to introduce now to share their views on some of these questions. First is Ambassador Francis O'Donnell. Now, he'll explain that he is a citizen of Ireland, but I have to tell you, yes, that may be true, but he's also a citizen of the world, with a remarkable record in United Nations affairs and various institutions, including the Order of Malta, with expertise in governance and in peacekeeping, and really following uncharted paths, which takes both bravery and commitment and imagination to try to create new scenarios and also ensure enduring results. And it goes back to this question of the benefit of humanity. So I'm going to call you Francis, but Ambassador O'Donnell, we would love to hear some of your views and literally not just your intellectual reflections, but perhaps one or two examples, well, from the coal face of humanity working on those very, very difficult circumstances that you have made a center of your own career.
Well, thank you very much, Isabella. Do you hear me? Yes, I think so. Okay,
Yes.
please call me Frank, as my friends do. I don't know where you got all of that insight into my background. It might be actually undeserved in many measures. But for those who may be listening in and are not the recipients of the uh, communications to this panel, I have shared with the panel by email my take on the root causes or factors and well, let's say the root causes and the deep drivers of global turbulence. Now, I'm sort of on the internet. You can find me as Francis Martin O'Donnell, and I will post up on Academia EDU later today under my profile there these particular points. So I'm not going to dwell on them now because I think that the previous speakers have really shown an enormous degree of commonality in terms of their perception of the challenges that we face, the root causes, the drivers, and indeed a lot of what we have to look forward to as a challenge. Let me just say this. This is for us not just as a community of globalists, and I usually say that proudly rather than pejoratively. It's an existential moment for multilateralism, as well as in the wider sense for this species in facing extinction, but for multilateralism. And nothing brought this home to me as much 11 years ago as when one of the P5 countries tried to gobble up a neighbor when Vladimir Putin's Russia attacked Ukraine. I had served in Ukraine for the last 5 years of my career as the resident coordinator, and I was absolutely stunned in 2014 when this happened. I couldn't believe that it was even possible. But things have only got worse since then, both in that theater of operations, but also globally. And the second thing that really struck me like a bombshell was to hear that the American delegation to the UN General Assembly not only was advancing the usual, at this stage, Trumpist rhetoric, but roundly denounced Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals. This is such a fundamental shock to everything that we have been talking about, that really, if we don't recognize this right now and deal with it, we will live to regret it if we live at all. And the problem is that I mean, Gary spoke about 2015, when, of course, we came up to the second phase of what had actually started in the Millennium Declaration in the year 2000, which was to come up with Agenda 2030 and the SDGs, replacing the Millennium Development Goals. So I read with great interest the concept paper which was put together for this discussion, and I have to congratulate the author or authors, whoever they are, on an extraordinary degree of perspicacious observation that the Agenda 2030 basically has met with increasing resistance and obstacles to realization. The world community lacks essential requirements to deal with this stupendous collective endeavor. A comprehensive integrated theoretical framework is missing. The knowledge of how to consciously guide, manage, and lead a coordinated process. The means to develop the leadership expertise and the capacity to direct all of this. It couldn't have been said more succinctly. So I think that is absolutely the challenge that we're facing now. In my reflections on this, let me just say that a couple of years ago, after many years of participating in the Global Baku Forum, where I was delighted to meet Amanda Ellis on one occasion, as well as Gary Jacobs and others. I tried to pull all of this together 2 years ago and presented a paper to the Interaction Council of former leaders in Valletta in 2023. And this paper was called Desperate Hope, or if you wish, the subtitle was Reflections on Survival Pathways for Civilization. And I tried to struggle with all of these issues in terms of the following main clusters of causes and drivers: geopolitical and security failures, environmental and resource crises, governance and institutional deficiencies, and socioeconomic and ethical disparities, which others have already touched on. Now, where do we go from here? I think that we are facing the immediate degradation of the United Nations system as the core foundation of multilateralism in our world. Because not only has America denounced the SDGs and Agenda 2030, but this DOGE business, Doge for want of a better thing, is now sneaking its way towards the UN with Doge UN. And there's different ways to look at that. But I mean, I'm hoping that certainly if Vuk Jeremic is really committed still to the multilateralism as he was as a former president of the General Assembly, that this is going to try and outflank the Elon Musk Doge and outflank Trumpism and try and arrogate or co-opt to the same sort of discourse, but to reinforce and strengthen the UN rather than to undermine it. And we all agree the system needs radical reform. But it's not the kind of reform that you achieve by immediately discarding tens of thousands of UN staff, employees, and subcontractors and NGOs. This is demonic. To do this is demonic. It is going to absolutely unravel the whole, I would say, vocational commitment that people have to that kind of an institution. So we have to do something fast and effective to save the UN from imminent institutional collapse, instead of actually strengthening it. Now, I had a very interesting discussion about just 2 weeks ago with Tatiana Valavaya, who's the Director General of the UN in Geneva. And I was talking to her about these things. I said, well, you know, knowing she's Russian and so on, I said, what do you think about all of this? And she said, well, you know, we have to let some things go. More or less, I'm paraphrasing. These are not her exact words. But what she wanted to see was far more support and resources for the core functions of the United Nations, at the foundation of which is the desire to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. So if we cannot actually deal with that, and we have been failing miserably since 1945 and 46, with a plethora of wars across the planet, but thankfully no world war. But what have we got happening now? We have India and Pakistan threatening each other in a very dangerous discourse, as well as no effective end to the war in Ukraine, let alone in Gaza, and so on. So I think we really have to do something to support the UN. And I have been asked on occasion by people, what do I think are the two most important things to be doing? It's a little bit like, you know, when Jesus was asked, what are the basic two commandments? You love God and love your neighbor. Well, I would have said, fight corruption and empower civil society. Because I think if we do these two things, a lot of the other things that we want to see achieved will follow through. But I would add to those today, because technology is moving forward, we need to try and use artificial intelligence to fast track us towards, you know, creative solutions for the future, to fast track us towards effective analysis of global problems. And it is quite effective in doing this. It's just a question of, if you ask the right questions, what kind of an answer do you get? So it gets back to this question of framing. And I've seen in the comments the positive remarks that were made about the framing of the issues by others. I think if we can frame the challenge for artificial intelligence to help us, as it were, accelerate and fast track some of the analysis and solutions, it would be very good. And of course, this gets back to something I've been thinking about for a while, which is that we need, you know, early warning systems that 25 years ago I was involved in New York with the UN. they've all failed because they never really managed to trigger a political decision that would have prevented a crisis from emerging, by and large. So we need to look at early warning systems and the linkage to political integrity and political decision making in order that responsible things are happening. The digital giants, with their control and mastery of information, data, have an enormously important role to play in helping us to build capacities for strategic oversight and actually envisaging what needs to be done. But I would also say, just to close this off, because a comment had been made about the superpowers and these large giants who are determining how we should be. I mean, the large powers. The role of the middle powers is very important because as individual small countries, they may have not much influence, but when they come together in coalitions and in regional associations or organizations, the rest of the world should actually be governing the show. And it should not be up to the United States, nor to China, nor to Russia, nor to any of the other big players to determine how we live our lives, how we save our planet, and how we move forward. We should have the whole community of member states coming forth through the effective alliance and coalitions of other countries. And most important in all of this is to advance the role of women in leadership, because I feel very much, and this is not to be tokenistic about this, but the paradigm of male chauvinist domination that has governed this planet since a long time, I won't even say when, but this is a bankrupt paradigm. We have to have a different type of emotional, intellectual, and I would say serious, compassionate commitment to preserving our species and saving our society. So I'll stop there. I tend to be a bit too loquacious being Irish, Isabella, but then, what can I do about it? Not much. Thank you.
Frank, thank you so much that you brought out the individual aspects and the institutional aspects, and indeed the existential aspects of the situation in which we now find ourselves and the problems that we're trying to address. And so speaking of fast track, I'm going to fast track over to our next speaker and introduce Lawrence Ford. So Lawrence is the founder and CEO of Conscious Capital, which means that he cares about the future and he cares about what capital can do to create a favorable future. And he works at the intersection of business and humanity. I know that he loves stories of purpose and impact, and perhaps he'll be able to share one or two of those very briefly with us. But we sort of have a pact. We had an exchange in the chat because I was very curious about a reference on his website that sounded like something that perhaps we might want to engage in as an association. Starfish hunting. So Lawrence, that is, we always learn something new from our conversations with our WASP colleagues, but this will certainly be one that we will all benefit from. And chances are none of us have this in our current vocabulary, let alone our things to do list. So if we were going to add starfish hunting to our list of things to do, what would we need to think about? Thanks very much.
What a great setup, Isabella. And thank you, Ambassador O'Donnell, for your remarks and your comments that will line up to some of my prepared remarks around artificial intelligence and the depth of the root causes that we're up against today. And thank you for the World Academy of Art and Science, and of course, my friend Gary Jacobs for this wonderful leadership, and the rest of the fellows, and Arizona State University, bringing us together at a time to act and think deeply together at a time that is more important than ever, that has been stated so well by so many of you already on this call. We'll get to starfish. I'm gonna leave that to the end and leave everybody on the edge of their seats. But it does absolutely align with what I'm going to be speaking about today and what I think is the most important. And what I'd like to offer this morning is really not a conclusion, but a lens and a perspective, a context, a theory of the root causes in the situation itself. As we've talked about so much here, not symptoms, but a possible solution getting towards the root causes that I hope invites really meaningful dialogue among us as we begin this discussion and this leadership around this future collaboration with everyone as we come together to lead the world into this next age. And I'll share my remarks in three parts with perspective as the key. 3 points I want to make here. One is that we are entering a new age. The second is we are living through what I call a third season. And the third is we have a chance right now to redefine meaning itself at the core issue. So let me first talk about we're entering a new age. Let's start with throughout history, the way that we've defined value has shaped the world we live in. First came the age of what I call the physical, when value came from land, labor, strength, and survival. Then we evolved into the age of knowledge, where information became our primary currency. We built entire systems, education, economics, governance around who knew what and how fast they could deliver it. But now that age is ending, and not quietly. AI is not just another tool, it is fundamentally shifting the source of value. When we once asked our fathers, specifically my dad, who was a brilliant scientist, it always used to be in our household, "Hey, Dad." And unfortunately for my dad, that quickly got displaced with, "Hey, Google," during his lifetime while he was still alive. And now we're moving to, "Hey, AI." And with that transition, something deeper is being displaced, our very identity. When machines can do what we used to define ourselves by, the question becomes, what's left for us? And this shift, combined with a changing global order that many of you were speaking of, growing unrest, the visible strain of aging institutions, tells me one thing: we're not just in disruption, we're in transition. And it's moving at unprecedented pace. AI no longer follows Moore's law. It's eating it for lunch. Today, our capabilities are doubling every 3.4 months. That's not evolution, that's an exponential leap. And if we don't evolve our inner architecture to match that curve, we will amplify the very flaws that got us here at scale and at speed. And so that brings me to my second is we're entering a new age, and we're entering an age in through the third season. Third season is a definition of what I framed in my first book, which was called The Secrets of the Seasons. All of us know this at a personal level. If we've been around the world long enough, we know that there comes a time in our life where we get our, I think the technical term would be our asses kicked. And it wakes us up and helps us remember maybe who we are and why we're really here on this earth. And if we're aware and conscious enough, then personally we come back to more of who we are and shift our perspective and get back more on purpose. And I know, because I know many of the leaders on this call, we've been refined through those processes in life, which brings our gifts today forward with power and clarity. But these transitions that are happening now are not happening in a vacuum. This is the first time in history that we are all in this together. This is a global third season. And COVID was just a warm-up as well as an example of how we are all in this together in our beautiful planet. What we do in this age decides the future like never before. Every age ends with turbulence. We know that through history. What I call third season, a time of collapse, awakening, reflection, and redefinition. A time when we're asked collectively not just to respond, but to reimagine. And that's exactly where we are now. Yes, it's volatile, but what if this isn't a breakdown? What if it's a breakthrough in disguise? And for me personally, I can't help but being more excited about being alive during this time. I think it is a fascinating gift to be here with all of our skills to be able to help guide us through this next transformation. But the only way I know how to do that is to look deeper, because beneath the headlines and the symptoms, AI, acceleration, climate risk, economic fragility, there's a repeating root cause. There's a bug in the system. In earlier times, it served us. In the age of physical, fear controlled and helped us survive. That wiring passed down through the generations was a feature. It actually helped us be here today. But now, in a world of exponential tools and global interconnection, that same feature has become a bug. It leads us to hoard, to dominate, to repeat the same power cycles that have collapsed empires through histories. As Lord Acton said so perfectly, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And we are entering an age of absolute capability without evolving our consciousness to match it. That's the risk, but also the opportunity, because once we see the flaw, we can redesign around it. That's the gift of every third season. We've been here before, but the stakes have never been so high, or tools this powerful. And the magnitude of this disruption is giving us the gift not to be able to continue on the same path, because everything is changing. So we must embrace a new form of meaning. And that's what I'm proposing here today. Because while we may carry a bug in our system, we also carry a profound gift. Humans are meaning-making machines. That's what set us apart from every other species. It's what allowed us to create shared myths, systems, science, language, and religion and economies. It's the reason we got this far. And now it may be the reason we move forward. Because if meaning is what shaped us, then perhaps meaning is what can reshape our systems. As the shamans say, it's a time to dream a new dream into being. And interestingly, science is starting to match the seers. Quantum physics is now exploring what wisdom traditions have long understood, that consciousness shapes reality, that the observer matters, that we are not passive within the system. We are participants in this creation. So what if our new dream started here? What if we began to measure value, not just how much we produce, but why we produce it? What if we evolved from GDP to GD purpose? A metric that doesn't just count, but cares, that tracks alignment, that rewards contribution, not just consumption. And this isn't just a philosophical shift. It's an economic one. GD purpose could offer a grounded, practical upgrade to our existing systems of capital. It doesn't require dismantling markets. It inserts a new signal, a purpose signal, into the mechanism we already use. It creates a tool that can shift behavior through how we define and reward value. The famous Buckminster Fuller reminds us, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes existing models obsolete. So GD purpose is not escape from capitalism, it's a lever within it. Designing a tool, its use changes the consciousness by itself. In closing, I'll share these ideas with hope and come back to the starfish, Isabella. So what if we greeted each other as beings who had purposeful, beautiful gifts, that we are all here for a reason? And we know that when people that we know are living on purpose, they have inner peace. And when more of us do it, we move towards world peace. And what if we went starfish hunting and we went out and actually looked for those people who were living their genius and had the solutions in the world? Because we know they're there, they just need to be discovered, empowered, and amplified. And so, Isabella, to answer your question, at the foundation, that's what we do, is we go starfish hunting and we highlight the beautiful people in the world who are living their purpose and have the world's solutions, so they can be empowered not only through capital, but also through collaboration, which is something that the world is calling us towards today. So thank you for the time, and thank you for everybody for being here to align on this such important, critical, amazing time to be alive. And I'm so honored and humbled to be a small part of this group, to be able to help navigate this change forward for our species.
Lawrence, thank you so much. I mean, you brought in the teleological, you brought in the optimistic, you've transcended the international, really moving to intergalactic, and you are in many ways proposing a new paradigm for the entire economic system and all of that represents for humanity. And I know also from some of the comments in the chats, this is a very inclusive model. Someone from China was commenting, well, what about commenting on our state of affairs and our own concerns in the system. So I think this is something that's very inclusive as well. It goes to the point that was also made about including women, including the next generation. So I'm really grateful for those very profound remarks. And also, I think I'm looking at Gary and the way he smiles. I'm getting to know him a little bit. And that smile is one of both pride and satisfaction. And I think he's thinking that among the World Academy is an excellent place to go starfish hunting.
Isabella, we need to move on to the next session. To be fair to the people who are only here for the 2 hours, we need to try and end on time. We're a little bit behind. We are going to stay on for another hour. If for those who can, we can open up all these questions and discussions again. We need to move on to solutions, strategies, and initiatives. For this session, it'll be moderated by Mila Popovic, who's the Acting Director General of Directorate for Interculturalism, Government of Montenegro, and her 2 panelists are Eden Mamut, the co-chair of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network in Romania, and a professor at Ovidius University in Bucharest, and Ralph Wolf, who's the president of the World University Consortium. Over to you, Mila.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to be here with all of our colleagues and friends, and first and foremost, as is due, to thank very much Arizona State University, Julianne Wrigley Global Futures Lab, along with UNESCO, Most Bridges Coalition, and on behalf of the World Academy of Art and Science and myself, to thank our colleagues and leadership of the World University Consortium. And because of that new leadership that exactly Ralph Wolf took over as the president of the World University Consortium, we're looking into the solutions and possible pathways forward in global education and future readiness education, if you will, given the context that we were just listening to. And in collaboration, in parallel with Ralph, we'll be listening to Professor Dr. Eden Mamut. What is fascinating here to see is that Ralph, our friend Ralph, comes from juridical arena, whereas Eden, as we have this custom to call each other by our first name in the spirit of camaraderie, in the service to humanity, Professor Eden is actually coming from nanotechnology and alternative sources of energy. It will be an interesting connection between education for the future based on their insights and how to work from engineering new sources of energy, human-centered. So inner sources of energy would be our focus, how to develop people, the notion of Bildung, if you will, of building of the new worlds, and the also the internal emancipation of people, growing people, and as well as emancipation of society and state in that sense, right along with designing and engineering of new systems of energy sourcing externally as well to sustain our world, which will have to really be transformed as well. So in conjunction, these 2 perspectives, I would like to actually focus their insights from the compatibility standpoint. And first and foremost, would like to call on Ralph to share with us his insight on solutions and possible pathways going forward based on the context that we heard, diagnosing and root causes. What are some of the solutions that will be able to infuse and saturate the entire social field, open the new pathways, and also how can we possibly take action individually, collectively, and on the basis of our partnerships in terms of also World Academy of Art and Science and our partnering organizations. What is our next step towards those solutions? Thank you, Rolf. Welcome.
Thank you, and delighted to be with everyone here. It's a real privilege to participate in this conversation. I'm going to focus on a slice of the larger context that we've talked about, which is higher education, which is the focus of the World University Consortium. I would say that many of the root causes that we have been hearing about and been discussing at WAS over the years is absolutely true within the higher education community. There is a rot, if you might say, that it is a system that focuses on developing economic gain, reputation, and global rankings at the expense of what is happening at the world. And so it is both a major part of the problem and we're certainly seeing, at least in this country, in the US, uh, the failure of higher education to respond, or just now starting to respond, to some of the challenges that are being forced on it here. But it needs to be more clear about how to be part of the solution. I actually look to the School of Planetary Health as one model. There are other examples around the world that frame the larger context as part of the educational system. We have to move to a model where students see something, a purpose, going back to what Lawrence was saying earlier, that they have a purpose that is larger than their own economic gain. There is a global issue. Are there going to be jobs for people? And is education or higher education going to prepare them for a world of work that is changing dramatically? And I think that we have to shift from personal gain to how people can participate in creating a world that we need to create. And given that higher education prepares future leaders at all levels, and they prepare all the teachers, that we need to design new models, transformation of higher education in terms of the content. Higher education needs to take a position that this is the context and that solutions are needed, and actually build and reform and transform curriculum and modes of teaching that engage students in being part of the solution. Going back to what Peter said at the outset, we need a model of education that is inclusive, that allows students to be part of their own educational process through problem-based learning and actual engagement in addressing what I would call the doom cycle. There are too many people across the globe who say, what is the point if we're going to end it all? Let me just gain for myself, for my community. We certainly see that in one slice of billionaires building bunkers for the preparation of the apocalypse, that rather than working to prevent, they are welcoming in their own way or creating the conditions. Therefore, I see that we need a transformation of the process that engages students in becoming part of the creation of the new models we're talking about. AI has a tremendous opportunity here. There's a paradox. I'm working with institutions that are developing complete AI curricular models. And on the one hand, we want to build connection, and on the other hand, AI can remove connection away from the educational process. One of the great values of our system of education is the interplay between people with different cultures and nationalities to be able to learn from different perspectives. And we need to see that As Frank was talking about multilateralism, we need to bring multilateral perspectives into our educational model and move beyond a purely Western frame of culture and values. We need to explore values. And in working with multiple countries, each country has its own approach that we need to learn from how to address these problems. So I would say that we need to build connection. One of the things that we are working on, particularly with the Black Sea Network, I hope, and with Eden Mahmoud, that is to use human security, which the World Academy has worked on for the last several years, as a framework for building a thread to understand every discipline, what its impact on the human culture is, on humanity is, as well as the planet. How do we build a planetary awareness? And it's not just going to be a single course. I've worked with institutions that have a course on sustainability. But how do we build a comprehensive curriculum of engagement, builds hope and inspiration, the capacity that the skills that they bring will be able to be used for the future. They have a sense of meaning and purpose, and to help us reimagine the future. So while we need to use AI, we need to use online learning because all education in many respects has become online. In many respects, assignments are done online, not just complete online courses. That we need to retrain the faculty to have this kind of preparation and mindset, and they don't. We need to see a transformation of the educational system, and we need to use AI in a way that individualizes learning, but with a common foundation of there is a purpose beyond themselves, and that they need to be able to have a sense of a shared visioning of what the future might be. And I think that is the term that is being used by some is called a global mindset, but locally interacting to improve their own communities and to address the problems that face them. Finally, I just have to say I've made it as a personal experiment to listen to the different kinds of media that I wouldn't ordinarily listen to, different that might be part of different kinds of echo chambers. And we have to find a way to personalize a planetary mindset with values that are really significant because that it's not just disinformation and misinformation, but there is a way that some of these issues that in some sense have no relevance to what we're talking about have become larger than life because somehow there is a connection drawn around this will make your life more fearful, insecure, which is why I say human security to me becomes a new rubric about freedom from fear, freedom from want, and how we can develop systems that put human thinking, human design, and planetary design at the forefront of what we make our education systems about. So I'm looking forward to being part of the conversation, developing actual programs through the World University Consortium, partnering with others, particularly using human security and a new value system as the frame. So I'll leave it at that and turn it over to Eden.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ralph. I would like to us all to think now after what you have proposed and the picture, the larger picture that you painted. You proposed that it is exactly one of the venues for propelling this kind of agenda, a positive evolving agenda, would be exactly the Channel of World University Consortium, that is the venue and the organization that could actually propel some of this new programming through certification, promotion, and other ways. I would like us to think about the ways in which already existing alternatives and alternative modes of education that are emerging all over the world right now. What are the ways in which we could design that collective intelligence, ways in which we can connect those initiatives or provide a platform for them to connect in order to build that alternative infrastructure that in architecture that Lawrence was mentioning through the Buckminster Fuller quote. So let us all think about the ways in which we could propel some of these solutions through our own organizations, efforts, partnerships, our networks, and multiply their effects, as well as to think of the ways we could design connecting that collective intelligence. And moving forward, as we're thinking about that question, Aidan, please, your turn.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mila. Thank you very much, Ralph. Very well established the scene, let's say, of putting an emphasis on the need to reconsider the values for the future. But I would like to put an emphasis also on another aspect. We are talking about this collaboration between science, education, and decision makers. And I would like to pinpoint on my experience on three responsibilities that I have. First of all, I am a member of the National Council for Sustainable Development in Romania, and we are under the aegis of the Prime Minister's Office of the government, reporting for all kind of suggestions, support for the implementation of SDGs. To be very honest, it is a huge work. But the Prime Minister of Romania is remembering about his Council on Sustainable Development only when there are very crucial elements, like, for instance, we have to prepare the voluntary report of Romania on the implementation of SDGs or the report for the European Commission. So in that respect, the point of building sophisticated, very comprehensive type of approaches are those aspects that are, let's say, the hidden part of the issue. You have to come up and to be prepared for that very special moment when the Prime Minister requires your input and you have the elaborated solution for that. The second responsibility that I have, I'm a counselor, honorary counsel to the Minister of Energy in Romania. And in this position, you remember on 28th of April, it was the blackout in Spain, Portugal, and part of France. So the position of the Minister of Energy was, what is the cause? So at that moment, the group of counselors, we had to come with a clear explanation, while you know very well the complexity of this issue of blackout and the fact that you require and you need very deep and detailed, let's say, kind of investigation, and the investigations are running on. So when the Minister of Energy requires such, let's say, a quick reply on behalf of the science and technological experts, that has to be done. You have to show exactly and to meet the requirements of such a thing. And the third aspect that I would like to pinpoint is I'm a member in the expert group of the European Agency, European Chemical Agency, and I'm working in the group on industrial nanomaterials. And you know very well that the problem of nanosafety, it's a huge issue. Every year, it is estimated that 400 new type of chemical substances are discovered, synthesized, or produced. So you have to have the proper framework in order to match the security and safety issues for all those things. And for that reason, what we are working at the ECHA, the European Chemical Agency, is a huge effort. But in any case, for instance, a substance that was applied now on a very broad, let's say, scale. Let's give just the example of nanostructured titanium dioxide that you can find it today in every paint. Last autumn, we succeeded to agree all together, the experts and the other agencies, about the procedures to evaluate the safety of this kind of product. So there is a long process that is taking place in this aspect. So for addressing this kind of issues, you need to be prepared. For instance, as a solution in our case in Romania, we developed a model for the entire national economy and to find out how the energy is used in the different sectors and what is the efficiency of using energy in the Romanian economy, but also to find it how this is used in the different regions. So you need to be very, let's say, forward-looking, and in order to identify the risks and the different types of vulnerabilities, just in order to be prepared for the moments that I told you. So the prime minister, in a let's say in a mandate of 3 years, he could, or 4 years, he could ask just once you. At that time, you have to be prepared for this, and you have to have all the tools required for that. Or regarding the problem of adaptation to climate change, you know very well that the problem of climate change, it is an issue where there are huge type of studies, strategies, groups that are working there and so on. But there is one moment when a community is facing a hazard, which can be a terrible flood, or it might be something similar. So in order to address that, we developed, for instance, in a large project with a huge partnership Europe-wide, we developed some new models how we can address these issues, how to identify different types of consequences far beyond that they are happening, to set up different models of identification and working and coping with these problems, to develop different types of digital twins, research vessels, procedures, and all these things, working in order to not harm the very beauties. For instance, these are the images from the Danube Delta, where you have to be very careful. We set up the National Center for Adaptation to Climate Change and a huge national digital twin for bringing together all types of data for addressing different issues of the consequences of the climate change, the data-driven science aspects, different aspects. And you could imagine the volume of the work that you have to do in order to address all these challenges in data-driven, to develop infrastructures for addressing these elements, and later on to come up when you are prepared to go to the citizens, to the communities, and work with them to understand what kind of things you have to be prepared. We also have this kind of clusters, innovation clusters, bringing together the business community together with the universities. Of course, not always the business communities might be interested in participating in this, but we have to attract them into this kind of frameworks just in order to raise the awareness for the problems. And finally, I would like also to address the problem of bridging the divides. So at present, we are in a pace of unprecedented development of different technologies like virtual reality technologies or artificial intelligence technologies. There is a tendency, particularly, let's say, in developed countries, to put a strong pressure and to gain a competitive advantage, and after that starting to think about what is going on with the others. So here I give the example of how we consider that we have to move from the beginning. So here It is a project Uptakers that we are implementing, bringing together universities from the European Union, from Rome, from Barcelona and Constanza, together with the universities from Egypt, from Jordan, from Tunisia, in order to bring them together with us and to bridge these divides. So these are some of the solutions that I consider that we could take into consideration and discuss along them in the next part of the meeting. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Eden. I think we are barely now getting to see the configuration of a structure that is emerging, or at least a way of building a structure, which I've personally seen through the work of UNESCO Bridges, for example, where you're seeing what Eden was speaking about, scaled out at the largest possible scale of partnerships around the values-based initiatives. So to continue basically adding or building, as I said, the Bildung forward, I would like to invite Ambassador Excellency Amanda Alice, former ambassador of New Zealand at the UN in Geneva and current director of global partnerships at the Julian Wrigley Global Futures Lab. And since our next session is on solutions in education, this will give us a nice layer in the structure that we would like to see emerge, and then basically propose much larger solutions, global solutions for global social transformation that emerge from different domains of human activity, such as education or policy making and others that we would like to add to the platform. Amanda, please, welcome.
Thank you so much, Mila, for that wonderful segue. Thank you to the World Academy for what has been a very inspiring morning. As Peter noted, we have really reached a decisive moment for humanity. And it was brought home for me yesterday. You can hear I've got a sore throat like Gary going to the doctor. My Uber driver wanted to tell me how important it was for the US to reclaim its country and to get out of the corrupt United Nations without any prompting. So I think that gives us a sense of the broader context. Thank you all for the excellent framing. I want to refer to it not only as turbulence, but also as a polycrisis. At the time the World Academy was founded, the issues of peace and human security were indeed paramount, as was dis and misinformation. But as Eden has so eloquently pointed out, the climate crisis is really something that is new to our era. And as Lawrence pointed out, AI is the other big issue. So for me, these are the current existential framings from a global perspective that we in education are having to address. And I'm very blessed to be focusing on what I think are the breakthroughs, not the breakdowns. I would like to address 3 areas. First of all, how research and thought leadership tools on a global scale can really help solve some of our problems, and using AI for good, for example. Second, how we look at global partnerships and outreach to really advocate for positive change. And thank you, Ambassador O'Donnell, for framing that so well. And third, partnerships for innovation and new solutions. So Ralph, I loved your let us help reimagine the future. So I'm going to do a rapid fire. I think, Vasugi, you were going to put up just a slide to give people an idea of some of the range of different tools that we have. One, for example, is the Allen Coral Atlas. 3 years ago, only 2% of the world's tropical shallow coral reefs were mapped. Now, with support from the Global Airborne Observatory run out of Hawaii, we have 100% coverage, and that is useful on a whole range of fronts. Second of all, Patricia Solis, one of our wonderful colleagues, is working with youth to actually engage them in framing solutions through an initiative called Youth Mappers, which uses OpenAI street maps to map critical infrastructure to really act as a lever to prepare for disasters. Next, we have Solar Spell, the solar-powered educational learning library, to help the some 800 million people who still don't have access to the internet, and to put relevant educational programs on, not only for youth, but also for policymakers. Then Sally, you may have seen in the chat, has pointed out, as did Ambassador O'Donnell, the importance of addressing toxic masculinity and gender discrimination. The Gender Equality and Governance Index is a global collaboration bringing together a range of tools to actually look at the impediments we have. And of course, women have 2/3 of the rights of our global counterparts still in 2025. So much to be done. When we look at how we can partner to create educational programs for policymakers, Parliaments for the Planet, with the 182 member countries of the Interparliamentary Union, springs to mind. The Sustainable Development Goal Academy with the Commonwealth parliamentarians, and of course, the framework of human security for all has been so useful in bringing together networks of networks. The 10 New Insights in Climate Science, which is produced by the Earth League, co-chaired by the Global Futures Laboratory, helps provide the negotiators at COP with the latest scientific insights in a way that really breaks them down and provides the policy implications. And we often forget in higher education that we can become so siloed and so mired in the complexities that we forget to be able to distill this. So for me, the 10 New Insights in Climate Science is such a useful document. Now, moving on to partnerships for innovation, the New Carbon Economy Consortium, which we co-chair, partners with a range of university networks around the world, including the International University Climate Alliance and the network of networks run out of Cambridge Zero, to really try to crowdsource solutions. And you're all invited the 29th of June to the 1st of July, hosted by the University of Exeter, for which I need to rush in 3 minutes for a meeting on preparation, but we would love to invite you as our guests to participate in that meeting, either in person or online, to really take these solutions to the next stage. Looking at AI and AI for good, there's been a lot of discussion, and we were blessed to be at the Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas with a number of colleagues here. ASU is the first university to partner deliberately with OpenAI through ChatGPT EDU. And it's a very different model. It's not just open source, it's open source with guardrails and with an ethics committee. And I think that's one of the key defining questions of our time. How do we ensure that AI, with all its power, is used for good? Two final examples before I wrap up. Climate Trace, tracking real-time atmospheric climate emissions, is now able to go down to the facility level for emissions. And that we are using to help through the Blue Planet Alliance, starting with islands, the smallest entities. And I loved Francis' exhortation for us to be working with middle powers and smaller countries. And those islands are now able to take that, figure out what is their biggest single source of emissions, how do they shut that down, and then move to a new programming of transition to renewables. And again, you're all invited to join us in Honolulu at the end of May for the fourth session of the Blue Planet Alliance, which is aiming to focus on the energy transition. And of course, that is still the most important single thing that we need to be focusing on in these turbulent times if we are not to continue to transgress these limits. And living in Hawaii with Mauna Loa actually measuring parts per million, we have now surpassed 430 parts per million. as of April the 23rd. So we're seeing the warning signals. We have these incredible new tools. And as Peter often says, what is lacking is societal will. And that is where the World Academy and partners come in to help elevate these solutions, continue to build and to co-create these new networks that can take these solutions and turn them into practical action. As Nelson Mandela said, it's always impossible until it's done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amanda.
you.
Thank you so much. And I would like to take a couple of minutes to propose another dimension here. We have seen the educational system solutions proposed. We have also seen the larger organizational level and network of networks proposed. I would like to actually address quickly the possibility of engaging social will right along with the political will, with another example from Montenegro, where I currently reside. With multiple identities, just like we've discussed with Ambassador O'Donnell and others, that we've all been truly exposed to planetary existence, some through rough experiences, some through, great honors of serving humanity. But in any case, we are no longer very reductive in our identities. And also because of that, everybody has along the way so far mentioned intercultural connections, the importance of multicultural perspectives that need to be taken into account, on one hand, integrated, but also that there has to be an emancipation of all the, humanity in terms of intercultural contact that they come into for the benefit, rather than for the benefit of humanity, for solution generation and knowledge generation, rather than conflict and tensions as we are seeing right now in a very regressive way globally. So I would like to mention that in terms of emancipation of society and state, and in terms of mobilizing social will right along and together with political will, there is an interesting advantage of some small countries right now, because we are not experiencing the turbulence that we are discussing as big as the larger countries are right now, or the global forces are right now, through the clashes that they are experiencing. In other words, smaller countries had a long wave kind of PTSD, if you will, complex PTSD, so that we are not at an immediate effect. We're not experiencing the immediate effect of the so-called empires clashing at this point. Because of that, and because of the increased long-term resilience that we had to develop, and stoicism, if you will, that we had to develop from every historical moment to another, there are possibilities that the small countries can prototype solutions on their state level, but they can also create networks, new networks of collaboration that bypass, in the best way that they can, the great forces on the global scene, particularly through potential for reinitiating the non-alignment movement. And because of that, Montenegro has been very interestingly geostrategically located. And one of the initiatives that I am leading, and I would like to propose and kind of point towards the greater implications, systemic implications of this initiative, is that Montenegro is the first country in the world. First of all, it is the first ecological state in the world that constitutionally has been founded and established that way in 1991, in unprecedented way, because we had a civil wars at that time here with 3-4 warring sides, kind of unheard of situation. And it has been an interesting country that has received refugees from all sides. All of this is extremely important, because it models a way in which you can absorb all the people from all warring sides and providing for them without propelling or perpetuating conflict internally, for peaceful living internally. When you take care of their needs and expose them to a multiculturally sensitive environment, they get to know each other and they get to live together peacefully in a way that they all made contributions to this country to establish it constitutionally as multi-ethnic, multi-conventional, multicultural. So the Montenegro is the first country in the world also that founded the Directorate for Interculturalism, strategically situated at the Ministry of Human and Minority Rights. And last year in December, we have adopted the first national strategy for interculturalism and social cohesion, applying the vision and values of interculturalism to generate, as a result, greater social cohesion, which is the great focalizer and stabilizer in the Western Balkans, as the key area in Europe and at large for peacemaking.
Camila,
could
I just
will round
interrupt?
off in a minute. Yes.
Thank you. We still
very
have
much.
Stephen to get to. Thank you.
Yes. So this is extremely important because of the lessons that we have learned at this critical intersection of East and West, North and South. And that is that through that national strategy, Montenegro has also become the very first country in the world to have the culture of interbeing as its public policy. This was accomplished solely through generation immediately and together of social will through youth and raising them as social artists for the transformation of their society, and political will at the highest level at the government. Some of the lessons that, and I will number them so that to save us time, that we have learned in this process is that we have to unify scientific and spiritual knowledge in the values of culture of interbeing that is based on, again, the scientific and spiritual knowledge that all beings, all life forms, all phenomena in the world are interconnected and mutually interdependent, with implications for that in culture, media, education, and all levels, institutional levels. Interculturalism is then the way to design new cultural code that has ethical, aesthetic, and ecological implications, meaning to go back to the Stoic basics, to stand for and code everything that is true, good, and beautiful for our way forward. We are strengthening social dialogue. We are for social cohesion. We are calling for science solidarity, which takes the programming of the World Academy a whole step forward from social responsibility that its founders called for towards science solidarity for common good. We are advocating for ecological diplomacy. We are calling for new social contract that will determine the value and price of everything based on universal human rights and responsibilities and universal humanistic values. And we are, of course, calling for connecting the collective intelligence into a truly integrated system for which AI can help us. Finally, the quality of human decision depends on the quality of questions we ask together. For us, and for this proposal, the shared proposal on the culture of interbeing that should be in education and media and culture at all institutions, we understand that there is a direct causal link between the vision and values of interculturalism and human security for all and truly sustainable development. That
Thank you,
effort
Mila.
definitely led by UNESCO Bridges in the most commendable way.
Thank you very much. We're past the 2-hour mark. I just want to mention this, as we said earlier, this is an ongoing discussion. If you'd like to become more involved or participate in this ongoing initiative, you can please email us at support@worldacademy.org for those who are watching. We still have Stephen Hartman, who's the founding executive director of UNESCO Most Bridges Coalition, who's going to give us his brief ideas on educational solutions, after which we'll go to closing remarks by Peter Schlosser and Gary Jacobs. So over to you, Stephen. Thank you. If you could just unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Grant, and thank you to the World Academy of Art and Science and for organizing this important conversation. In the interest of time, because I know that we've run over the 2 hours that had been planned here, I had intended to develop a line of thinking that I can bracket for the time being. And if we do move over into a more informal discussion after this this part of the program. Happy to revisit that. But I think what I'll do now is just to very, very quickly try to emphasize in outline form how this event has come together and is nested in a sequence of interrelated activities that many of the partners in this room right now and on this Zoom call right now have been collaborating on for a much longer time. And so I would emphasize, going back to our efforts in 2024, coming together with Global Futures, with the Bridges Coalition, with the World Academy of Art and Science, with UNESCO, and a dozen other partners. We put together an event on mobilizing the outcomes of the Summit of the Future in September. From idea to action and impact was the framing of the entire event. And that is continuing into this year, and I believe feeds directly into both the root causes and solutions to the Great Social Turbulence side event that happened in Baku in the middle of March, which itself is a platform for the discussion that we've had today. And we know it will be continuing in a more detailed form and in further iterations moving forward. This itself also aligns with an event that's happening today at ASU, Key Insights in Education for Planetary Futures, which has been getting planned since much earlier this year as co-sponsored by the Global Futures Laboratory, by the UNESCO Bridges Coalition, and the G-Forces project of the Teachers College at ASU, and which collected almost 100 submissions on suggestions for what was notable about the development of education for planetary futures this year that deserves to be highlighted and editorially curated, and will continue, is expected to continue through an editorial and curatorial process moving into the second part of this year that we expect will have outputs during Climate Week in New York, during the COP, we hope, in Brazil in November. And that was seen as being braided really with the discussion on global turbulence that is being led in this discussion. And we saw that discussion, the discussion we're having now, having notable implications on the kinds of solutions from an educational point of view that can be highlighted in the Key Insights for Education on Planetary Futures as an ongoing project. What I want to sort of step back from that and indicate that many of the same partners, WAS, certainly Global Futures, UNESCO Bridges, Globe Ethics, are coming together now also in events that have been approved for the Global Forum on the Ethics of AI in Bangkok, Thailand, between the 24th and the 27th of June. Both with the Global Forum. This is the third sort of chapter or iteration of the Global Forum on the Ethics of AI. It takes its starting point from the groundbreaking UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence and the readiness assessment methodology framework that was set forward in that groundbreaking recommendation on AI ethics. So we will be coming together. We expect to be coming together, many of the partners here yet again in June around both a side event, a half day, possibly going into a second day side event that's now in the co-designing with UNESCO and with the Kingdom of Thailand on enabling ethical AI for present and future generations at a time of heightened global insecurity, where again we see this turbulence discussion and the focus that we have in this discussion coming together with education and the importance of education as a tool and as a means of actually generating the capacities, the social capacities we need to be meeting the major sort of social system and ecological system challenges that we find now as we move into the second quarter of the 21st century. In addition to that, there will be a UNESCO as part of the main program in the Global Forum focus on environment and ecosystems and policy pathways to reach nature positive AI. The implementation of AI and the ethical implementation of AI and the creative implementation of AI towards meeting the significant ecological challenges that are being faced in the world now, and that we know are going to become even more critical in the future, particularly if we don't find ways of changing trajectory. This aligns with, I think, the fast track trajectories initiative that ASU's Global Futures Laboratory has led, and which is a continuation of the Global Futures conferences that happened 2-3 years in a row in New York over the last few years. And we see all of these different partners and all of these different focuses, not as distinct, but as interrelated and braided. And therefore, we're working in this context together with our colleagues, Iveta, who had to leave to actually start one of the sessions on key insights in education for planetary futures that's going on. There's a couple of sessions in that going on online today. We see all of these coming together, coalescing, and will be an important part of, I think, the outcomes, the outputs, and the creative solutions that we're going to be working on over the next year. So I haven't gone a lot into the education, although I'm happy to do that if we have time later, just to develop this additional line of thinking about the ways in which education is contributing. But what I will say is that in the areas of ethical public communication, in critical analysis and translation of generative AI outputs for great public utility in addressing pressing social, economic, and ecological issues, and particularly in the application to urgent needs in the care and management of social environmental systems on which global populations, human and non-human, depend for survival and flourishing now and in the future. We can be using AI, and we can be preparing educational systems at various levels to be addressing the ecosystemic challenges, the challenges of species extinction, loss of biodiversity, but also cultural extinctions, loss of cultural diversity, loss of knowledge coming from cultural losses, knowledge that inhibit our, the loss of which would inhibit our abilities to carry out systemic regeneration in the case of depleted environments, and the nurturing of future flourishing and the building of resilience in the case of regenerated environments. So this is the focus that I think that we're really interested in going in, especially with the AI connection, which is so prominent for very good reasons these days. And so that's a taste of how I'd hope to be able to develop these thoughts with maybe a few more minutes. But this is an ongoing discussion, and I look forward to continuing it and having an opportunity with all of you to be developing these ideas co-creatively and finding solutions together. So thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Hopefully we have some time for the people that can stay on for a deeper dive on that. I'd just like to ask Peter Schlosser now to give us his closing remarks, followed by Gary Jacobs. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you, everybody, for a very rich conversation. As we have had to expect, it had many strands, a lot of individual phenomena that are coming together that really create this moment of transition. In essence, the way I see it is, and trying to bring a lot of these things together, is the turbulences are just an expression of a complex system that is in transition. And what you have in these situations is you have a higher level of excitation of the complex system. And if you get to a certain level, you get to resonances, and that brings certain part of the system down. If you want to see it in a positive sense, it actually then leads to reorganization of the complex system into a new state. And that was actually mentioned, that we are in that. Now, transitions always happened. If you look through history, we always had transitions. We have the rise of structures, intellectual structures, political structures, power structures, and the fall, typically at a high cost. So our challenge here is to say, can we make that transition without the high cost? Can we learn from the past? So far, humankind has not shown a great capacity to be good learners from history. this is our moment to say, can we actually do that in the face of major challenges, but also opportunities? Can we move more to opportunity side rather than the challenge side? That is something that is clearly, on our mind, and I saw that sort of coming through the discussions. In that context of understanding what that complexity does, we have to, I think, be a little bit clearer between the distinction of root causes and derivatives of some small set of root causes. Because I think that we are still putting root causes into the category of, in essence, impacts from some movers as root causes. So that's something that we should pay attention to as we are moving forward. For example, climate is always coming up as the major issue. Climate is an outcome of too many people using too much energy of the wrong source. Now, yes, we feel it, we should pay attention to it, but the climate solutions are not in the domain of climate, they are in the domain of energy, in the domain of behavior of using this energy. Another question then is, looking at this fundamental concept of a complex system in transition, the ultimate complex system, of course, being the Earth system, can we anticipate what we want and where the transition should go? What do we want to transition to? And that really is something that has to be future focused. We have to look back, we have to learn from it, but our focus has to be on which future can we imagine, given all the complexities. Do we really want to, just float along, or do we really ask that fundamental question? What is our capacity as human beings? We believe we control the Earth system. Far from true. We are part of nature. We have capacities that actually allowed us to get out of balance with the life supporting systems. Do we truly have the capacity to understand the system and to change it? Or are we simply floating along as one part, imagining that we have control? That's a very fundamental, very deep philosophical, metaphysical question that along the parts of our considerations on action, we always have to keep in mind in the background. So if we are now looking at some of the, I already mentioned climate, but AI is another thing that is everywhere in the discussion. AI, we have to keep in mind, this is not something that came out of nowhere all of a sudden. People have, sometimes that feeling that with the appearance of ChatGPT and other generative AI all of a sudden appeared. AI is with us since decades. Look at your home, look at your car, look at your cell phone, look at all the environment in which we move. It was a slow buildup that now crosses some thresholds where it becomes much more powerful. Somebody mentioned, it takes on new capacities on timescales of months to years. Now the challenge for us is we enabled it. When I say we, it is academia and society as a whole. We enabled it, but along the way, we lost our capacity to understand what the consequences of it is. A lot of good is coming from AI. We should make use of that. But there are also a lot of negative consequences. Just one example, Trump, Musk, Doge was mentioned. Without AI, we couldn't write 2 million letters to fire people within 10 minutes, right? So we couldn't connect databases that are used for vindictive action rather than for positive action. So as we are moving forward, I think we have to pay much more attention to understand what is the positive side of AI and use it, but also keep in mind where AI can influence us in a much more, negative way, in a sense. So now closing out then, looking at that complex system approach to the state of our planet and the transition that we are in, a very fast transition, faster than academia works. What does it mean for academia, for universities? We are all coming from that background. What is our role? What is our responsibility? What is our moral obligation? And in my view, it's going back to the point where we really have to rethink universities, where we have to rethink academia. We have moved out of the domain of trust by society. We have isolated ourselves by thinking way too abstract, not connected to what the world needs. This has to come back to a point where we are part of society, where we are serving society, where we fulfill our mandate that society gives us to be one of the primary knowledge generators for society to move safely into the future. It needs different models. We have to go away from only reductionist science. I'm not saying we have to abolish it. We need this idea space, but we have to add with a significant capacity holistic thinking, transdisciplinary thinking, thinking for impact, action for impact, transgenerational, lifelong learning, empowering those whose world we are just destroying. Give them the space they deserve. Let's go back to the original idea of a university. We deviated from that with a lot of benefits for a certain period of time. That time has ended. We have to go back to the original idea of the university. That is where I think WAS has a major opportunity to guide us, where some of us have to be brave enough to break some of the academic systems that hinder us to be the force for society that society deserves. So these are my general observations, and I'm sure we will continue to probe them, to discuss them, have other perspectives, but it's urgent. We have no time to contemplate too long. We have to be willing to take risks in this experimentation. If we follow the typical academic procedure of trying to be 99.99% certain, which we never are, we lose too much time. The world has bypassed us. We are now in the shadow of what is happening. We have to make a major effort to get ahead of it in terms of understanding what lies before us, what can lie before us, and become a major mover of a trajectory that will lead to positive outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Gary, your closing thoughts?
Peter, it would be very hard to follow what you just said. That was so rich and so comprehensive, and I think a very powerful message for us to take forward from this. I'd like to thank all the panelists who have participated so far, because I think the contributions universally were very rich. And I would like to leave time to hear from all others who have not had a chance, who would like things to share. First, by reminding you that this is an invitation to collaborate in the future, and that was the purpose of this meeting, was really as an invitation and to put issues on the table. A couple of comments. We did not conceive of this program, this event, as a program on education. But it certainly is rightfully a program about education. And I think when we look at it from an evolutionary point of view, we can see that education has been one of the most fundamental institutions, maybe we could say one of the greatest organizations humanity has ever created, because it's the institution by which we learn from our past experience, organize it, and take it and try to pass it on to the next generation so they don't have to repeat reinventing the wheel and making all the mistakes that past generations have made. And so I think it's more than a coincidence that so much of the discussion, which was not planned to be, goes back to the roots of
how the educational system has to change. Why? Why education? It's not the economy, it's not the technology per se, though it's connected to everything else, of course. It's because education is the thing where we're trying to consciously improve the way we develop and give the next generation an insights and capacities that we don't have, or we haven't had, or we haven't fully capitalized on. So I think it's right that education is a core part of this. And Peter was so eloquent in describing some of the limitations of education that have to be overcome. And there's much more to it. And he's also talked about AI. And I would just say one of the projects that we have been collaborating with Bridges and ASU on is looking at the future of education. Now that AI is there, the figures show that we should double the capacity for higher education in the world in the next 15 or 20 years to give, not to reach the level that's there in the most developed countries in the world, but to reach about double where the whole world is today. We need to create double the institutional capacity. And now we have a technology that could really make that possible. Doubling the existing system and the existing knowledge is not going to solve all our problems. We have to learn, as Peter said, from the limitations in our existing content, our existing way of learning, our existing way of thinking. And trying to understand the world we live in, because the educational system, like many other institutions, is part of the problem. We perpetuate theory on economics about what economy is and what was our GDP that one of our panelists was talking about instead of production purpose. We have economic theory that preserves and increases the focus on outmoded ideas that are incompatible with the future of humanity and the sustainability of humanity. So education is not just the process of teaching, it's the process of the intellectual perspectives that we're passing on to the next generation. And in that way, it ranks very, very high to the top on my list of areas which should change if we're going to tackle the challenges that we face. There are many areas we haven't talked about today, and I'm just mentioning them to put them on the list for future discussion. The Academy is promoting a project we call the Peace Offensive. We're working now with Club of Rome and European Academy of Sciences and beginning to spread out on it. There are things we can do to address pockets of violence and tension and conflict at all levels in global society. We don't have that institutional makeup now. It's an area that could have a big impact on reducing the turbulence. Another area we haven't really talked about except in very briefly is if human security is so important to building the confidence and the willingness of youth to look positively to the future and work for it, employment is a critical factor in that. The Academy ran years of programming on the need for changing policy and theory in employment, and I'm only going to mention one thing. Good, solid research done in the US shows that the cost of the society to unemployed people is far higher than the cost that would be there to pay them to work. Cost in terms of violence, crime, health problems, mental health problems, the loss of the most precious resource we have, which is really the human resource. So there's ample evidence and data on and strategies to address this. As we talk about radical changes in education, we have to be looking at radical changes in other areas too, which will be to the maximum benefit of society and also address the human security at the foundation.
So I'd like to stop there, again, thanking all of you who have contributed so far and made this possible. And Grant, let's open it up and see if there's someone else who would like to share their thoughts.
If you could please put your comments in the chat bar or in the Q&A section, or simply raise your hand.
Anyone who would like to speak, Vasuki can promote them so they can be seen also, Grant.
Sure.
Raise their hand or let you know.
To kick things off, I have a question for Ambassador O'Donnell, who's obviously experienced firsthand the complexities of human communication around the world through his work. My question is, sorry, my dog is in the background. My question is, policies don't implement themselves, people do. Gary was talking earlier about a new breed of leader that's needed in the world. How would you paint the picture of the ideal leader? What personality and characteristics would they need to have to implement what we've been talking about today?
That's a very good question. And many years ago, when I gave a talk to a youth forum in Rome, I tried to distill what I thought would be the kind of profile of ideal leadership. So I will try and dig it up and post it here if we have another moment or two. But basically, I think what we have at the moment in the world is a real deficit of integrity and accountability and leadership. And the group of former leaders called the Elders, when Mary Robinson was still at the helm of it, brought this out in one of their missives. And I think I think we have, in that regard, a number of organizations which bring together former and sometimes current world leaders to think about global challenges, including challenges of leadership itself. The oldest of these seems to be the Interaction Council that I've been involved with for quite some time. And I will be giving a brief talk at a dinner to them in Dublin next Tuesday. They will begin their next 39th plenary, I think it is. But after that, I will immediately go to the south of France because we have, at my initiative, a first ever retreat of our peacemaking reflection group of former UN retirees. And we have been bedeviled by the challenges that the world faces. We modestly realize we have no role functionally or institutionally at this stage other than as retirees to help those who do have roles and maybe to advise, but we don't want to be a spanner in the works either. And so I'd be very careful about whatever we would burden, even just as communications to the United Nations at this stage. So let me try and pick that essay off. It's actually on my academia.edu profile. If we have a few moments, I'll try and pick it off the web and post it here. But let me close on this and thank you all. And maybe you can address a question to somebody else while I do that homework for you.
We have a question from David Chikvaidze. David, if you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
He's rejoining as a panelist.
Oh, there we go. He's unmuted now.
And ask David to introduce himself, please.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, David.
Yes, hi, and now you can see me.
Hi, David.
Hi, thank you very much for recognizing me. I've been a little bit reluctant to join because I joined the whole meeting quite late, so I didn't want to speak or sing out of key, which I'm not a singer. I usually sing out of key, but I think my comment would be of a general nature on the subject of our discussion. We're talking about global turbulence. I think turbulence is something we feel, but the turbulence is not the reason. Turbulence is the result. And I've given a lot of thought before I don't know if I'll be able to quickly itemize some of the most important things, but I think the turbulence we feel is actually the reason for it is that we're living in a change of eras. That's the most important aspect, I think, and it's creating an upheaval in many aspects of our lives. I think not in any particular order. I think the Westphalian gene in the nation states is spiking with a vengeance, and multilateral mentality is being sidelined. It's the multilateral mentality of the 80-year-old mechanism that was created 80 years ago. It's not overall multilateralism. We see that the nation states are going into LMGs, more and more like-minded groups, which to my mind is a cop-out, because the multilateralism that was created 80 years ago was supposed to serve everybody, and it is supposed to be used by everybody, and it is not being used. And for that reason, they're going into LMGs, and the LMGs actually in the past 30 years have contributed to the sidelining of the universal multilateralism, if we want to identify it as that. Globalization, which was globalization in the economy, world economy, which was already severely ailing, is now being administered successive lethal injections without any clear alternative. Obviously, the whole technological progress, let's call it, focus it to AI, is totally changing everything, every aspect of our lives. And that's adding an underpinning to this whole upheaval and change of eras. And finally, as the world was bracing itself to watch the battle of the reigning superpower to defend its command positions from those who would unseat it, we're seeing a fundamental change of waypoints and principles and policies, and a diffusion of this power, which adds to the change of eras. So I've been using the word we. And this is another point that I want to make very quickly. I think we should define what is we, who is we, because we is very, very non-homogeneous. We is the academic and civil society community. We is nation states. We is armed groups. We is North. We is South. Unless we define it, we're going to be talking in the same generalist manner as we say the Security Council is not able to do something. No, I'm sorry. It's not the Security Council. It's the member states of the Security Council. The Security Council doesn't exist outside or without its member states. It's not an entity unto itself. So that I would change. And finally, I would highly sort of support in every way what Gary was saying, that education is key, because while we are not able to impart directly or get the nation states and the leaders of the world to take on these wonderful, lofty ideas that we're tossing around here and trying to turn into action, what we can do is we can do an end run on today's leaders by educating the future generation, that they will become better leaders than we have today. And really, finally, I mean, it would be great to have leaders. What we have is politicians. So I'll end with that.
Thank you, David. Stephen, I see your hand, but we have a quick question from Sally Kitch. We can just, there she is. Sally?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you for this interesting discussion. I do want to point out some of the conversation that's been in the chat. about some of the root causes that are not always identified in conversations like this. We have to actually recognize, first of all, what our previous speaker, David, just said. We are not a we, or we are not a unified we, even those in this group who share a great deal and a lot of values and a lot of intentions. But there are still divisions of interests and power and recognition among us. And I speak primarily for racial and gender differences that change the dynamics of the way groups and nations behave. This is on particularly strong display in the Trump-Musk administration, in which white masculinity is brazenly proposed as the only form of leadership and the only form of policymaking that is worthwhile. What they have said about the SDGs is perfect example of that value system. And I challenge this group and others that you're connected with, that we are all connected with, to have the courage to look at the roles of masculinity and racism, masculinity training and racism in the way the world works and in the solutions that even we propose. I was happy to hear our Irish colleague mention that he's meeting with a group that Mary Robinson used to head. In 2018, Mary Robinson spoke quite frankly about the fact that climate change was a gendered problem that required a feminist solution. She was vilified in certain, I'll call them manospheres, particularly online, for making that statement. But she was a strong believer that paying attention to gendered conditions and gendered policies was required if we're going to change the trajectory of the world that we live in. So this has been discussed a bit in the chat, maybe not attended to by everyone on the panel, but I just wanted to urge that it become part of the conversation in the future.
Great. Thank you, Sally. Stephen, your hand is up.
Yeah, I'll just say really quickly in response to a couple of the comments that we've heard already. They both Frank and then David were bringing up directly or indirectly the state of multilateralism, and I felt that in the year or so leading up to the Summit of the Future, there was an expressed intention to be revisiting the nature of multilateralism. First of all, I should mention that as being part in a program that has a role, a statutory role within a UN organization, UNESCO, I'm very, very concerned about the fate of the UN as an institution. At the same time, that I can acknowledge and have acknowledged as being within this program, we're a program with one foot in UNESCO and one foot outside of UNESCO. And to that extent, we connect up academia, civil society, and even indigenous groups and local municipalities. It's an odd assemblage that come together around the table together in the Bridges Coalition, and that's by design. And so being a heterogeneous organization in this way, but at the same time being nested within a UNESCO program and therefore a UN program, I've often had occasion to see the unresolved tensions within the multilateral system. And the voice that certain actors get and certain actors don't get. Member states prevail in the UN system, and there was discussion leading up to the Summit of the Future that the idea of a renewed multilateral system, a UN 2.0, would be perhaps prominent, and I don't feel it was as prominent as it could have been and should have been, and I felt that can was kicked down the road. in many ways. And so what I'm wondering now is in the turbulence that we're experiencing, which, as David pointed out, is an effect. Can there be an opportunity for doing what I don't think they followed through on convincingly at the Summit of the Future, and revisioning and revising and rethinking multilateralism so that it is more effective? There are some aspects of multilateralism that just don't work and that allow the multilateral system in some, especially in national context at certain times, that begin looking inward in isolationist terms to vilify the multilateral system. And I think that's unfair because I think that it's an enormously productive, constructive, and important institution filled with many, many selfless people. In terms of the people who actually get the real work done and who are committed to peace, committed to building a flourishing world. And the structures of the system, though, don't always live up to, I think, the ambitions and the potential of the people who are working within it in that fully, if you think of it in its grandest, broadest sense. So what I would like to do, in following up on a couple of those comments, is to try to center this question about how this can be an opportunity for actually beginning to think about how multilateralism can go beyond the limitations of that 80-year-old structure that don't really speak to the world we're in anymore right now. And rather than pushing it all to the side and giving up and saying, well, I guess that's the end of that, thinking generatively about how we can actually improve upon it and make it more relevant for our times. So.
Thank you, Stephen. Mila, your hand is up.
I was wondering if it was David before me, but I'll be brief regarding multilateralism, Steve. It's an interesting geostrategic tectonic shift, and I know David will probably add some thoughts to this so we can think together. An interesting shift where some countries are actually slightly sighing a relief, releasing a relief of a sigh of relief, because the powers may not be as focused on them as they were before. All of a sudden, some people that are dropping through the cracks of those tectonic shifts are maybe relieved partially. Others are terrified because this is kind of, as much as we do anticipation, and some of the things that are happening are unpredictable because they're depending on a whim of certain leaders, right? And what is interesting that there are alliances emerging in certain regions of the world, and they will be emerging more, that there will be a different kind of multilateralism rising. So there will be unlikely partners, that will emerge out of this. And I think this is why I would love to repeat again, paying attention to what is happening in smaller countries at some key regions in the world, except that there are no inconsequential destinations anymore on the globe. But just the exchange between Ambassador O'Donnell, or should I say Frank, and I on the sides, he was talking about that he led the initiative in which, in his function at the UNDP, he was connecting Montenegro with Costa Rica and their practices for this unprecedented, proclamation of the first ecological state in the world in 91, and setting that terms of reference and collective point of reference for everybody. So the places where certain small countries cannot compete in military, and hopefully we shouldn't, we don't need to, even though we're pushed towards that direction, or through financial systems or other ways, we will be competitive in terms of ethical standards, in terms of new global norms, and the capacity to prototype those recommendations on the ground of those small states, and then form alliances in the regions that need to be focalizers and stabilizers in some key spots on the globe.
Thank you, Mila. David, you're next. I wonder if you could maybe answer one of the questions we received on the chat earlier as part of your comment you're going to make now. It was a comment from Juan Long who stated, "We seem to give much more weight to a Western view, and so far we have received limited information on how the large Oriental civilizations are willing to move ahead. And in that, I would like to also include Africa, whose population will be 26% of the world's population by 2050. How do we include these big voices, and how do we prevent a Western-oriented, skewed perspective towards the solutions we're talking about?"
Thank you, Grant. I'm sorry for taking the floor a second time, but I just wanted to circle back to something that Stephen was saying and just draw the line, the distinction between two terms. And I'm not saying that Steve didn't draw the distinction, but in the context of conversation and discussion, these two concepts tend to sometimes be used interchangeably. And I'm referring to what I used, which is multilateral mindset of nation states. And what very often we hear an equality sign between multilateralism and the organization that is seen as a multilateral organization, which is the sort of default. As soon as people hear multilateralism as being sidelined, etc., we think, well, let me get a screwdriver and fix the mechanics. No, that's not the issue. The issue is that the member states' mindset is in a different place. That's why I said that the Westphalian gene was kicking in big time. They are all going into egotistical, I can do all this on my own. That's why they don't need that multilateralism. Now, this situation is not remedied by fixing the organization. And a perfect example of this is the most recent genius pronouncement from the committee that was put together, the UN 80, which has recommended that New York and Geneva delocalize some of its posts to less expensive countries. I mean, it's gross mismanagement. Instead of asking the member states to say, what on earth is it that you want the organization to do? First, set the objectives, then talk about money, then talk about staff. I've been saying this for, 2 decades minimum. And I've said this to non-UN audiences, especially when there was a big element of business, saying, can you run a business like this? You call in your hired president to the board of directors meeting, and you say, okay, take this much money, hire 103 persons, and start working. And you say, yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. What do I do? He said, we'll tell you later. Just start working. They laugh. I say, of course not in real life. But then why are you making the UN work like that? Why are you cutting budgets and passing it off as reform? The other problem here is that the Summit of the Future that Steve was referring to, unfortunately, was yet another example of the United Nations Secretariat under duress of its member states who don't want to step up to the plate, trying to cut off its own limbs and say, oh, we're reforming. Of course, an organization needs to be reforming, and it's being done all the time. I've spent over 30 years in the UN. We were in constant reform. But what we are lacking is the member states stepping up and saying, okay, boys and girls, you are our organization. We want this organization, as opposed to 1945, we want it to do X, Y, and Z. For that, we think this is how it should go, not member states representatives coming to a summit meeting in New York and talking about lofty goals and without having the slightest intention of following up on anything. It's just a beauty contest and a way to see and be seen. That's what it is. And the Secretary General is jumping backwards through hoops in order to please the member states, so maybe they'll be lenient to us in the next budget cutting cycle. This is no way to run a railroad. I'm sorry. Regarding the question in the chat, once we, again, I'm using the word we, once we use the word we and mean everybody, that's when we will be able to take everybody's views in. Very often, and I've said this in UN meetings back in the day, we would be discussing humanitarian assistance to, I don't know, West African countries or East African countries, and there wouldn't be a single representative of Africa sitting in on the meeting. It would be only donors. Back in when I was in the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, I went to one of my undersecretaries general and I said, we have this donor interaction group. How about we create a recipient member states group where we brief them exactly the way we brief the donors on the way we spend the money, the donor money. We brief the recipients on where we allocate this and how do we manage this money and what we hope to achieve with it, and we involve them as well. And we went to the G77 and used that secretariat to bring in all these countries, and it went off like a dream. They loved it. That's the way it should be. But unfortunately, we're all experts in countries that are constantly in the news, or we come from those countries. We can discuss and think that we are great specialists in the domestic politics of America or Great Britain. Do we know what the hell is happening in Nepal or in East Timor, other than those who have served in East Timor? No. Do we know what's happening in Lesotho? No, because it's not in the news. We're not interested. It's not a big player. And we keep forgetting the saying that I think Mila wanted to refer to, is that in the General Assembly, there's no such thing as a small member state. So I'll finish with that. I'm taking up too much time, but it's a very important issue. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Francis, before we come to you, I think Jonathan Granoff had a question earlier.
Oh, I don't have a question. I have a statement, but I'll defer to Francis.
Thank you. Can I go ahead?
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Grant. Well, it's great to hear David once again. Yes, I've been to East Timor. I've been to Lesotho as well. In fact, a long time ago. But we in the UN, when we were in the UN, and we're not in the UN anymore, we also tried at the member state level and at the secretariat level and at the agencies levels to gradually integrate the interests of civil society, to a lesser extent, the corporate sector, after the end and only after the end of the Cold War. Because during the Cold War, it was absolutely taboo for organizations like UNDP, let alone any of the others, to work with civil society or the corporate sector. But after the end of the Cold War, it started happening. And in the Habitat Conference, the second Human Settlements Conference in Istanbul in 1996, we designed it in such a way that there were fora also for municipalities and local governments. But let me also say that there's at least one organization, and there may be more now, in the UN, which have a tripartite governance structure, the ILO, for example, which brings together not just the member states, but also the trade unions and others. So you have this multi-stakeholder forum. And I think what we need is a multi-stakeholder form of multilateralism, not just a state-based form. And Boutros Ghali, when he spoke to us from Cairo on his deathbed about a decade ago, those of us who were meeting in Baku at the Global Baku Forum, he said to us, he said, the nation state is not the only game in town. Now you have civil society and the corporate sector and so on. And we need to have processes that are more inclusive of those interests. Indeed, perhaps different fora or assemblies that would connect into the UN. And I know that this is happening at the level of the General Assembly in a particular kind of way. But I want to just close by mentioning one other thing. And of course, but before I do that, UN 80 and what David was saying, sounds to me like there's a lot of influence there from Doge-UN, which would be the other animal that's arrived on the scene. And surprisingly, Vuk Jeremic, former president of the UNGA, is involved in that. I don't know what his latest thoughts on it are. I have asked him to share them with me because I know him for the past 30 years, having served in Belgrade and also, of course, for Mila in Montenegro. The thing I wanted to say is actually to focus in a little bit on Serbia. And because a student movement in Serbia has been gaining great strength, it's no longer just a student movement, it's a student movement plus professionals, academics, local people of different types, reaching out to all the villages all the way up to Novi Pazar and spreading across Europe in the largest movement, and I use these words carefully, the largest movement of student and people-led activism across Europe since May 1968. And this is something which absolutely has to be taken note of to see where it goes. It started out as a fight against corruption. It's now going for a regime change and a bunch of other things. But they have been met just in the past few days by the foreign minister of Austria, who basically said, what you are fighting for is what we want in the EU. It's what the European Union is all about. And therefore, it's an appeal to close that black hole of the Western Balkans in the EU, surrounded by the EU, but not yet in the EU, which goes back to the Thessaloniki Declaration that they should all be joining into the EU in 2013. And that came about as a result of conversations at the funeral of the late Zoran Djindjic 10 years prior in 2003. And it still hasn't happened. And that's the big challenge in the Balkans. But I think, this has been a very exciting panel. I'm very glad that I could participate in it. I will have to leave now because other duties calling me. So thank you all very much.
Please don't leave until
Thank
I
you so
pay
much for your
full
time.
respect. Thank you so much. Your knowledge is exceptional. Your sensitivity is exceptional. You've been in the streets with people, it's apparent, right along with policymakers. And I'm blown away. I was reluctant to speak about Serbia, so it doesn't sound like I'm Balkan-centric, but that's a new term, and it will become very relevant. That's the whole point. I'm so grateful to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amanda, you've made a comment that you have seen a lot of duplication and overlap in the international architecture. Would you like to comment on that? And then
Yes.
I'm just wondering if we should maybe take one or two more questions if there are, and we're over 3 hours now. Maybe we can close. So if you do want to make a comment, please put something in the chat bar now.
Thank you. I want to preface my, Gary.
Sorry, Gary?
No, Jonathan had a comment I thought he wanted to make.
Yes.
Okay.
You had a statement.
Go ahead, Jonathan.
Modernity is a preoccupation with technique. It begins with the Industrial Revolution. It begins in the 17th century, the application of the scientific method to doing things. And the why, the telos and purpose, has now been occluded by the how. So we have art without beauty, religion about rites, rituals, and practices without transcendence and love. We have philosophy in our universities about the methodology of philosophy. We have our financial system operating independently of the production of goods and services. We have the greatest paradox of all being the nuclear venture in which we produce weapons. The more we perfect, the less security we get. And we've forgotten the very purpose of the state, which is to provide security and peace for people. Because the dialogue and the dialogue politically is entirely about efficiencies of methodologies of how, with very little discussion of fulfilling the human endeavor. I believe that one of the insights of the founders of WAS was not the World Academy of Science, which is just a way of knowing things in a very methodological fashion, but but really was really science and technology, the application of science. But it's the art, and what is the art that's needed now is the art of articulating values and meaning. The forces of provincialism, religious zealotry, ethnic identity that are pulling the world apart are filling the vacuum of the promotion of the universal values that we all adhere to. And we've inadequately explained to the public why democracy is important, why human rights are important, why fundamental freedoms are important, and why the underlying ethical values that support those institutions are important. And I think that part of our mandate is to bring that ethical, value-driven, universal value discussion into centrality, because that is the why. As the great insight of the manifesto of Russell and Einstein said, remember your humanity, forget the rest. And what they're really saying is, remember those values of kindness and love and compassion that makes us human. That's part of our human purpose. They were saying, remember the why.
Thank you, Jonathan. Amanda? You muted.
Unmute yourself, please.
Still muted.
Sorry, everybody. Technological Neanderthal.
We can
So
hear you.
thank you for an absolutely riveting series of discussions. I'm sorry I had to step away for a meeting with the University of Exeter, so I apologize if some of these comments have already been covered. In many ways, Jonathan, I think we should just finish there because that was so beautifully poetic. It seems my very transactional comments may be inappropriate. But I did want to say, having been both New Zealand's permanent representative to the UN and having worked inside the World Bank, there are justifiable frustrations on the behalf of small countries. The architecture is just so complicated, and we're very good at setting up new initiatives and more new initiatives and very bad at closing things down. And there are so many overlaps between what UNDP does, what the World Bank does. I mean, there are so many overlaps. And I think that is one of there needs to be a streamlining. But I also think that we in the Western world are culpable because we have not allowed the shifts, for example, a rising China paying a significant amount at both the IMF and the World Bank to have a commensurate share in voting rights. With the result that we have seen the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank set up, we have seen the BRICS Bank set up, we have seen the rise of the BRICS. And I was quite shocked last year in October when I was at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Samoa to find Prime Minister Modi not there, but rather with Putin in Russia, along with 32 other countries who are thinking about joining the BRICS. So I think we need to be very clear-eyed that there is a new order that is emerging. And you've seen China with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. There's a whole range of small things that were being floated. And the BRICS originally had only 5 members, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now, if there are 32, they expanded to 9 last year, but I was quite shocked. So I think we need to be very sanguine as the World Academy of what is happening more broadly. And I'm sorry if you've already discussed the BRICS, but it's something that I've been watching with some alarm. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Amanda. I think this is a good time to wrap up. Just a reminder, we will be continuing this conversation in June, July at a 3-day online conference hosted by WAS. We'll keep you updated. This is all being recorded and transcribed and put into documents. Please look out for emails with summaries of our discussion today. And we look forward to hopefully hosting you again in June, July. Gary, any closing comments from you before we end the session?
Just thank you again, everyone, for your contributions. Very rich discussion.
Great. Well, thank you to everybody and to everybody who was listening and to the panelists and the moderators, and look forward to continuing this discussion. So thank you and
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
goodbye.
Thank you so much. All the best to all the friends. Stay safe and uplifted.
Thank you, everybody, for a wonderful conversation. It was great. Sorry to miss that pivotal piece in the middle.